Arc 6, Chapter 41, The Scent of Peace. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray, Zero Starting a Life in a Different World from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop. Archbishop fan art created by source. His consciousness returns. The first thing he feels is a difficulty in his breathing. Subaru, cough, cough, Hack feeling something unpleasant collected in his mouth. He coughs violently, spitting out sand and forcing open his heavy eyelids. He had lost consciousness. He feels sand trapped within his eyelashes. While fighting against that, Subaru wonders what had happened and tries to recall what had occurred to him just before. If he remembers correctly, there had been a terrible confusion, and after that he had attempted to leave the tower. There was no doubt that he had managed to leave the tower without being disturbed by anyone. But Subaru, the earthworm, the white flash of light, recalling the terrifying incident that had happened just after that, and recalling how the impacts had continued to rain down, one after the other, Subaru seemed quite suspicious whether he was actually alive. Had it only been down to luck that he had survived all of these abnormal events that he had been dragged into? However, even if he were to die, it was doubtful that he'd truly remain dead, though that was how the current Natsuki Subaru was, an unwanted foreign being. Subaru. After the stingers, I fell right into the termite nest. He remembers that the ground beneath him had collapsed, and he, along with the earthworm's gigantic carcass, had been swallowed by the earth. He had managed to stretch out his head to secure some oxygen. However, even his head had been swallowed up by the sand, and he had faded out of consciousness. It seemed as if he should have died of suffocation, but that hadn't been the case. Subaru, this place, is this underground area beneath the desert. Looking around, he couldn't find a source of light in this room. The darkness was so thick that he could barely see anything nearby. Opening his heavy eyelids, he takes the palm of his hand out of the sand and pushes it forwards in front of him. Only barely can he see that it's there. The world around him was too vague to let him see the existence of this lifeline. It really seems as if he just barely remains in the world of the living. Subaru. This ain't appealing, damn idiot. Thinking that much, Subaru tries to slowly move his arms and legs in an attempt to release his body, which was trapped in the sand, from the heavy pressure around him. The feeling that he couldn't breathe was due to the bed of sand that had swallowed him from his waist down. He was quite lucky that his upper body hadn't been buried. You could say that this process of extraction could be likened to trying to raise up a flag on a sand dune without causing the flag to fall over. Subaru carefully extracted himself out from the sand, moving it away, making sure not to make any poor movements to avoid burying himself in the sand again. Subaru. After barely escaping from the sand, he felt a great sense of fatigue overpower him. It was likely because his body temperature had been sapped by the cold sand, along with the continuous pressure it had exerted on him. The fact that he couldn't grasp how long he had been out cold was horrible. Subaru, guess I was lucky that when I was out cold another earthworm didn't come and munch on me. While speaking, Subaru becomes aware that his throat is parched, and he moves his hand to his waist. When he had escaped from the tower, he had fastened some leather pouches containing enough water to cross the desert there. But his fingers, which had been trying to grab that water, closed around thin air. Despite fumbling around several times for them, he couldn't find the leather pouches. Subaru, I should have expected this, considering I was buried from my waist down. It seemed like the water pouches had come off when he had been swallowed by the sand. As well as that, it looked like the bags filled with his emergency rations had also come away. Although it indicated he was in a fatal situation, he remained calm at heart. Already, his heart had been paralyzed by this cruel situation. It was perhaps becoming absurd to react every single time like this. Subaru, at least it's gotta be nearby, eh? Getting on his knees, he fumbles around the bank of the sand mound that he had just gotten out of. It is quite a large amount of sand. He didn't expect to find it, but as if it was just mere consolation, he feels something soft exactly where his body had slipped out of. Confirming it with his fingers, he was surprised to find that it was the leather pouch that he had been looking for. But Subaru, it's empty, so why am I even surprised by this again? Feeling the pouch with his hands and gauging its weight, he realizes the contents are empty. Just in case, he places the opening of the leather pouch to his lips, but only a few drops trickle onto the tip of his tongue. Even if it was just a little bit of water, now every drop of it was precious. He was thirsty for more. Subaru places the leather pouch to his waist and decides that he will feel around his surroundings again. Subaru, if he had found his drinking pouch, there could also be a chance that he'd find his food. But such an expectation had been betrayed, just like when he had found his water. His food had fallen out and was now scattered all around the mound of sand he had been buried in, almost as if it had messily eaten it up. Subaru. Due to it being dark, he can't see around the sand bed properly. However, he can recognize that the food that he had brought now lies scattered around it. The crumbling pieces left on top of his palm have not maintained their original shape. If he were to speak truthfully, he recognizes that the food is now inedible and leaves it scattered there. Gulping, Subaru's throat ached in thirst. Subaru's food was scattered around his surroundings. This fact clawed at Subaru's mind as if it was scratching him with nails as he desperately tried to remain calm. Subaru starts to sweat profusely, wasting precious water, as fear fills his heart as he thinks of being preyed on by earthworms. Originally, this huge earthworm had crawled out of here, so to speak this was the monster's habitat. The earthworm who must have been the chief among them had died, but it would be no surprise to him if there were other monsters inhabiting this passageway which it had cohabited with. Subaru, I need to leave this place as soon as possible. However, he knows that he can't see his surroundings well. He starts to crawl using his hands and knees, relying on feeling his way using the ground beneath him, never mind even the walls. He could merely flee crawling on his hands and knees, making sure to check for ground, walls, a path, his own being. Subaru. Ow, it hurts. Shit. Ouch. His right ear had been grazed by the white stinger. The fingernails on his right hand were still halfway through regenerating, and the organs in his body were still aching him. While suffering from all this pain, Subaru was crawling out, trying to escape this place. Even if beforehand he didn't know exactly what the heck he was running away from now, he must do anything to get away from this strange being. Anyway, in order to get away from this unfamiliar being which inspired such fear in him now, he had no choice but to continue his escape. Subaru. Smelling something, Subaru moves his hands and feet forward towards it, as if he was being guided by it. The smell gradually became stronger, eventually becoming strong enough to be regarded as a reliable sense. It guides Subaru deeper within. It had been a little over an hour since Subaru had begun to crawl out of this place. Whilst escaping, Subaru had accidentally slid down the sandbed quite a few times, and had also been obstructed by walls in his way on this trackless path. Sometimes, sand had rained down from above which had caused him to react by rolling over in fright. Whilst doing that, Subaru realizes that he's within a cave underneath the desert. Although it hadn't really been any great salvation that he had noticed this, it did bode an omen to its real meaning. A strange, yet alluring scent suddenly drifted into his nostrils. By no means could he call such a strange thing sweet-smelling. In a typical situation, smells are generally considered to be of lower priority and have less value when trying to figure out a situation. However, considering that his sight was sealed by darkness, and he couldn't tell what was happening in the world around him, this sudden stench felt extremely fresh to him. Therefore, Subaru started to crawl using the wall to feel his way towards the source of the scent. It looked just like when a young child first starts to learn how to walk using walls. Sniffing with his nose, he looked exactly like a dog who was following a trail towards the depths of the cave. No, to the depths, or maybe the entrance of the cave. He cannot be sure where this scent is leading him to. Subaru. Pant, pant, asterisk, pant. Without even noticing, Subaru had stuck his tongue out and had started to pant heavily, exactly like a dog would. He had heard that dogs would stick their tongues out and pant in an attempt to cool their body down, but Subaru didn't really equate this comparison to his current gesture. The reason why Subaru had lolled his tongue out, imitating something that a dog would do, was because he wanted to increase the amount of knowledge he could obtain from his surroundings by sensing the flow of the air on his tongue. Subaru. In just a few hours, Subaru had applied the methods that creatures use to move about in the dark. Naturally, his half-baked attempt was completely different to how it occurs in reality. The darkness was unchanging and didn't provide Subaru with any hints of what was around him. In this lonely area, all he can hear is his own breathing and the faint scratching noises of himself paddling across the sand. But this felt comfortable to Subaru now. It was terrifying. It was horrible. But one way or another, he must manage it. It was the first time he had naturally embraced this natural human feeling. Right now, Subaru loved this silence and this darkness and this lonely space where no one was around. Right here, no one would hurt him. Right here, all he needed to do was keep floundering around to try and escape. Right here, even if he needn't think about anything, there were things to do. A feeling of complacency, similar to the feeling you would get if you let a muddy river sweep you along, embraces Subaru's heart. If he could just melt away into it, that'd be no problem, wouldn't it? In this manner, he had submerged himself in thought about it whilst escaping from his fatigue and habit. Subaru, damn it, what is this? Subaru had steadily crawled through the dark cave. On his way, he had come across a fork in the road with a path going left and the other one right. He anxiously deliberated on which path to choose. In the end, he decided on the right path. From then on, there was a long, long journey whereby he followed the scent. Would there be a place where he could find relief at the end? Would he reach somewhere which had light? Even though such a prospect was not necessarily true, Subaru pushed forward without any concern for this. However, Subaru, there's a dead end right here. The path that he had followed had steadily narrowed. After going up a slope, Subaru had found a narrow path awaiting him which could only be traversed by literally crawling. At the end of it was a wall of sand. Ultimately, it was also where the source of the scent ended. Subaru, why did I even come all the way here? No, wait a sec. Angry at the blockage in his path, Subaru had been about to strike the wall of sand, but caught himself. He racked his brains at the current contradiction in front of him, having followed the scent all the way here. Subaru had unmistakably arrived here by following the scent which was lingering in the air. The scent had been wafted in by a draft and had certainly arrived all the way to Subaru, who had been quite far below. In other words, if the drafts had flowed from here, it meant that this wall of sand could not be a dead end. The draft had surely flowed into the cave from the outside. Subaru, if that's so. Frantically palming his surroundings, Subaru shuffles back a bit. He fumbles around the dead-end path for anything. He hadn't missed anything on the left, right, front, or bottom. Then where had he not looked? He had been abandoned by the stars. Had he been afraid to look up? Subaru, there it is. After more than an hour of backtracking, his hand that had been touching the ceiling brushes against the air and Subaru's eyes sparkled. Standing up, he puts his arms up, and even when he puts his shoulders up, they don't hit the ceiling. There is a hole. The hole is more than twice as large as Subaru's waist, and his body would fit through it easily. In other words, if he were to push up using his back and legs, he should be able to climb out. Subaru. A gentle breeze was flowing into the hole. Until now, Subaru had clung on only to the target that he had been pursuing, that is, the scent. It was flowing in from the wind above to the underground area below that he was in. There was no choice now but to climb up as Subaru had sniffed to make sure of it. Subaru, GHH, NHHH, FFFFF. Placing his body by the hole, he pushes his back against the wall. Of course, because the wall was made up of sand, if he makes even a slight mistake in the angle in which he applies his body weight, he risks the wall collapsing and his plan failing. Being careful not to do just that, he places his feet against the wall too. Subaru thrusts his feet and buttocks up and slowly starts to climb out of the hole. Subaru. Fortunately for him, the wall has some grooves embedded within it in some places, which to an extent help Subaru support himself as he makes his solitary climb. Perhaps, if you happen to be a person possessing superhuman physical ability, you could simply put your feet on one of the grooves and get out of the hole just by jumping. Subaru, puff asterisk. But Subaru does not possess such physical abilities, thus he has no choice but to continue steadily climbing up. Still, it seemed like his body had been trained in the time which was unknown to him and was suited to withstand activities like this. He gradually adapts to his body having a new engine, just like as if he was getting used to driving a new car. He'd gotten the hang of it by the time he had managed to pull half of himself out of the hole and had established that he was a pretty good climber. However, before being able to show the full extent of his strength, Subaru, I'm out. He doesn't know roughly how many meters he had climbed up the wall, but if he were to take a look, he had climbed up to such a height that if he were to fall down, he would die from the resulting fall. Finally, Subaru had succeeded in climbing up the wall. Subaru. He didn't feel any great emotion about it as he thought he would have. That wasn't down to him thinking anything tedious like, when you go and do it, this is how it is. Climbing all the way up the wall was a piece of cake when faced with this. That's all he thought. Pulling himself out of the hole, treading onto the fresh sand, Subaru stands up. And taken aback, he mutters a brief word about the majestic structure that was standing in front of him. Subaru. A door. Right there in front of him, there was only a strange door standing there without relying on anything else for support. Subaru was at loss at what to do about the door that was standing right in front of him. Subaru. I can see it. It seemed that the hole Subaru had gone through did not lead towards the surface. He was most likely still inside the cave. If there were different tiers to the cave, then the place he had probably dropped down to was B2F, and now he was at B1F. Rather than it being a large-scale area, the room was hidden by the means of something that you could call a stopgap. The room had nothing that resembled walls or floors. It only had a single door which was standing there stark still. Could there be anyone at all who could fathom what this meant? Subaru. Other than me, that is. Whilst looking at the door, Subaru announces this with extreme arrogance. Placing his hand on his chest and widening his eyes, he was clearly aware of what the door he had suddenly encountered was. It was his door. He had a strange confidence about it. He was confident that this door was his own. The draft that had flowed to the underground area he had been in, the scent that had been carried in by the breeze, he had followed it all the way here. Everything was bringing Natsuki Subaru to this place. And now, the door that stood in front of his eyes was glowing. Even in the darkness, it was asserting its presence. It was longing for the moment when Natsuki Subaru's hand would open it. Subaru. Subaru walks up to the door with a spring in his step, as if he was about to go and caress something beloved, like a sweetheart. It looked like a set of wooden double doors that were about twice as high as Subaru. Straining his eyes, he can see that at the center of the double doors there was a doorknob that allowed it to be opened. Can also see a strange pattern in that particular area. He can see 7 jewels there. Subaru. Wah! Whilst looking at the jewels, Subaru touched the door, and just as he did, the jewels on the door started to shine, 4 of them. 4 of the 7 jewels were shining brightly, welcoming Natsuki Subaru's visit. The door's master did not admit the visit of those who didn't possess the keys. TL note. Unclear if keys is plural or not. Based off context, it likely is plural. In the wink of an eye after he blinked, Subaru did not know where he was. Subaru, wah. Breathing a sigh like as if he was stunned, Subaru looks down at his hands. He can see, of course. There was light here, there was color. He can see where he is standing. He is standing on a stone floor, there's stone on the floor. Subaru. TCH Subaru's body stiffens as he looks around his surroundings in confusion. In his surroundings, there are reddish-brown walls, walls. They were the walls of the circular tower. The huge door behind him leads to the outside. He was inside the tower. He was on the 5th floor of the Pleiades watchtower. He had come back to the very place that he had tried to leave with determination. Subaru, theirs. No way. He can't continue. His words never come out. It must have happened just after he had blinked. In a split second, Subaru had ended up standing stark still in this place. He cannot break out of his shock. He feels dizzy, and his feet start to wobble. He was barefoot. His shoes had come off. Subaru grinded his teeth together. It isn't the case that he is completely stunned by this place. He could run away right now, no. Subaru, why should I run away? Subaru looked up above him with extreme fury. Murky feelings were boiling up inside him. A burning hate like molten magma was zealously whirling inside Subaru without him even being aware of it. His time alone had ended. The peaceful darkness had ended. Clinging to that scent had ended. His hatred was one without rhyme or reason towards the fact that everything he'd had there had been wrenched away from him. Subaru. Why does Subaru have to run away? Someone plans to kill him and had once, no twice, taken his life. Why would he want to be in place where they shamelessly masquerade as good people, hiding that fact under a guise of tranquility? There are only suspects inside this tower. Does he want the culprit to be inside? Did he escape because he couldn't do it? He had been an idiot. He had been an idiot. He had been an idiot. He didn't know anything. If whichever one of the suspects was the right one, then he could just crush them all until he found the right one. Subaru. Luckily, all of those bastards were careless around Subaru. He would find out whether it was only the culprit that would show caution around Subaru, though the culprit has no way of knowing that he is suspected by Subaru. That is the advantage Subaru has here, having once died. Once he had realized that he had died, he knew that someone was trying to kill him. The only thing he has to do is kill them before they commit that act of murder again. Subaru, ha! A wicked smile appears on his face, and Subaru covers his mouth with his hand, stifling his laughter. The idea for his gratification had just suddenly leapt out from inside his head. Subaru had received a blessing from the heavens to pick up and rescue himself. Subaru. Then he needed some sort of weapon to set things straight swiftly. Subaru rushes down the spiral staircase. He was going down towards the 6th floor below him. The 6th floor was fuzzy in his memory, but he recalls that it is the lowermost floor of this tower. When Subaru and the others know, when the original Natsuki Subaru and the others had come to the tower, they had borrowed on the strength of lizards to cross the desert, using things that looked rather like horse-drawn carriages. Of course, if there are such things lying about, they may come in useful for an emergency. Subaru. Subaru had arrived at the lowermost floor and found the carriage he was looking for, however his feet had stopped there. The reason that he had reacted like that was because just beside the carriage, collapsed, there was a huge lizard, already dead. Its head was missing. Its body from the neck down was lying on the floor. Had the blow that had decapitated it been that powerful, the head that had been blown off was nowhere to be seen nearby. Instead, blood had flowed out of its huge body, staining the ground below. He found that a considerable amount of time had passed since this tragedy had occurred, since the blood had dried already. Subaru. The stingers. What Subaru had thought about in this moment was that it looked a lot like how the mysterious white stingers had blown up the head of the earthworm which had battled against him immediately after he had left the tower. This impression was consistent with the remains of the lizard that had collapsed here. Then that attack was from someone inside the tower. It was highly likely that it was one of the suspect's attacks. Thus, the lizards themselves had been treated just like cattle in their pitiful lack of burial too, Subaru. Does this mean they are not trying to hide their true colors anymore? It seemed like his opponent had been quick-tempered, and rather than giving Subaru a chance to escape, they had instead delivered a decisive blow. Whilst trembling at this fact, Subaru went inside an intact carriage. It showed signs that it had been used as a place to sleep. Tearing through the inside, Subaru finds a big knife inside one of the baggage. Dare he say it had some purpose? Was it something similar to a survival knife? Rather than it being an all-out weapon, the large knife was probably good for cutting through obstacles. But in this situation, it would still be a splendid weapon that would fulfill Subaru's aims. Subaru, I don't know who the enemy is, but he will show them. With his body burning with dark feelings, Natsuki Subaru heads upstairs, knife in hand. A twisted smile curves across his cheeks, boosted by his hatred. If he wants to be saved, if he wants to escape, he must believe that anything he murders is justified. With that, he will go forward. Below his smiling cheeks, he doesn't notice the tears of fear that are streaming down his face. Arc 6, Chapter 42, The Tower of the Dead. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray, Zero Starting a Life in a Different World from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop. You Archbishop fan art created by Kinocope. Natsuki Subaru slowly continued up the stairway, stepping firmly as he continued up. With madness filling his eyes, fury raging in his chest, and a knife in one hand, he continued to walk up. Subaru, kill, 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 I'll kill you. Definitely gonna kill you. That whisper, rather like a rasp, were the words of an endless curse. If power dwelled in the might of words, then the sheer amount of curses Subaru was spewing out would indeed bolster his deed. Kill. Each time he said it aloud, he felt as if the power lodged in his knife increased. Subaru, kill, 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 kill. While muttering this, his sight would occasionally blur over. Maybe it was a combination of his exhaustion from spending hours crawling around the area beneath the desert and his fears. For a moment, Subaru's head felt strangely heavy, making him shake his head a few times. Now was not the time to collapse in a place like this. After all, the place he was in was an environment full of people who were a danger to him. It was the sort of environment where he couldn't tell between friend or foe. It was already an enemy's den. In order to protect himself, Subaru had to kill them. Otherwise, they would come to kill him. Subaru, kill, 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 kill. He didn't want to kill them. He had to kill. If the langage de l'aime here took the condition of using words correctly, then it was likely that the word kill coming from Subaru's mouth was not quite right. If it truly reflected his feelings at heart, then the right word he should be using here wasn't kill. Rather, I don't want to die would be more correct. That's why he'd made up his mind that the first thing he would do was kill anyone who appeared before him. Natsuki Subaru reached the 4th floor of the tower, and there he laid his eyes on that. Subaru, HHA, he let out a short gasp. His knife fell on the hard floor with a shrill clatter. His body was trembling. His fingers were stiff as rocks, unmoving. Subaru shrunk back, able only to shake his head slowly. The smell of blood brimmed in the air, and the traces of a terrible fight that chilled even him. The stone walls and floor were broken and smashed up, and standing there in the area that housed the lingering remains of such destruction was Subaru. He looked at that, frozen in place. Sharla, her head crushed, was sprawled down on the floor, with her body a complete sight for sore eyes. Sharla's corpse was in such a terrible state that it made him want to cover his eyes. Her long brown hair, which had been tied up, was sprawled untidily across the floor. Her limbs were flumped about to her side energylessly, and what's more, one of her arms had been sliced off at her elbows, the other at her wrist, with the severed parts nowhere in sight. Her lustrous pale skin bore countless wounds, and a large amount of blood had been splattered nearby. The trail of blood continued further back down the aceway and ended where she'd met her end, proving that the battle had been long fought and changed places many times. Most likely, it had been the wound to her head that had settled the fight and killed her. Wound was too light of a word to use. That which had laid waste to her life was a lethal hole. Maybe it could be said that someone had swung down a great hammer on her head. He couldn't think of any other barbaric way that her head would have been smashed in, scattered about, throwing its insides just about everywhere around. A tremendously huge blow from something had smashed up her head. Sharla's head had been smashed apart and completely destroyed. Though it had only been for a short while, he remembered how she'd unhesitatingly gotten closer to him and turned her genuine open smile at him, Subaru. Subaru sunk to his knees where he was, as he gazed at her remains aghast, in shock, in disbelief. The urge to vomit was unbearable, unable to stop himself. Subaru puked up the contents of his stomach. The contents of his stomach, which had turned to gloop, mixed in with his gastric juices, splurged out of his body with an acrid smell to them. They even got onto Sharla's remains, further humiliating her in afterdeath after having died in such a gruesome manner. Subaru, ghhh, goo blurg. Despite that, Subaru, while hunched over, continued to vomit, having no composure in himself to pay attention to how he was desecrating the dead. He could do nothing more than let his throat open as wide as it could and spew out the burning sensation that pervaded him as he felt the pain of his stomach tightening and the unceasing feeling of wanting to vomit. Finally, when he finished puking his guts out, Subaru threw himself down to the floor. He lay spread-eagled, staring up at the ceiling with his hands over his face. It was the first time he'd seen someone's death. It was the first time Subaru had ever come face to face with a person's corpse. For most people, the first time they'd encounter someone's death would be when an elderly relative would pass away. However, Subaru had never been to a funeral before, as his grandparents on both his mother's and father's side were still in good health. He'd never come across anyone's death in any other case either. So, seeing someone else's death like this for the first time was a real shock for Subaru. Even more so when the manner of her death had been so gruesome. There are people who can have their lives taken away from them as cruelly as this as well, he thought. Subaru. Me too. Subaru muttered this to himself and lifted his body up. He wiped away the vomit that was caked around his mouth with his sleeve and shook his head as his ears were ringing hard. Then, using the wall to steady himself, he slowly stood up. Subaru had been pushed in the back, knocking him far down the stairs. His corpse too must have turned into a lump of grizzled meat, one which surely no one could bear to take a second look at. He himself had been unable to see his own corpse, and for that he was slightly relieved. There'd probably be no way he'd keep his sanity were he to see his own death with his own eyes, or the like. The mere realization of the fact that he had died was enough to shock him to the point where it felt like his heart was about to burst apart and shatter into tiny pieces. Subaru. Anyways. Cutting his train of thought short, Subaru gained belief from the fact that she was dead, all the while trying his utmost to keep Shola's remains, who were strewn near him, out of his sight. The fact was, there was still some terrible strife lurking within the tower, and at the same time, he understood all too well that this strife wasn't aimed only at him, but also at some of the other members inside of the tower. He felt sorry for the deceased Shola, but he could also say this bode good news for him. Now that he didn't know who'd been the one that had killed him, Subaru wouldn't be able to rest until he struck out all the suspects inside the tower. But with her dying, that allowed him to strike off one of the names from his 7 suspects. Yet at the same time, the one who'd killed him was hostile with someone other than himself, or at least he could be sure that they were a dangerous individual who was trying to kill everyone in the tower. In other words, there was a chance that someone other than him would kill the murderer who'd killed him. Then all he ought to do is kill everyone who was left. Then he'd be able to acquire some peace of mind. If he were to kill the culprit who was trying to kill him, along with the potential candidates who might try and kill him, then, with only Subaru left behind in the tower, he should be able to indulge himself in some peace and respite. Subaru. In that sense, the ones in the way are Ram and Echidna, huh? It'd be easier if that damn Julius was dead too. With Maylie and Beatrice being children, it would be pretty easy to off them, so he didn't need to think too hard about them. Emilia, and although she was dead, Shola as well, should have been easy to catch off guard and kill in the sense that they never had their guards up around him. However, Ram, who was always contrarian around him, and Echidna with how shrewd she was smelled like more trouble. Even if he did catch them off guard and killed them, those two would be the hardest to aim at. That was the impression he got. It was tough to say about Julius, but in his case, he was worth his utmost vigilance considering he was the only other man. As cheesy as it was indeed a problem that he carried a sword at his waist. However, on the flip side, there was also a chance that he'd be cornered down were he to take his sword. Subaru did kendo, so it could perhaps be said that he'd have an advantage assured were he to snatch it away. Also, Subaru. Above there, that fucking bastard. Subaru shook his head straight away, having thought about eliminating that red-haired man who was sitting on the upper floor of the tower under the guise of being an examiner. It would be impossible to eliminate him. That thing was an untouchable superhuman being who lived outside of all reason. By Natsuki Subaru's common sense, it would be definitely impossible to beat him. There were people here too that just couldn't be killed. The only saving grace was that it was hard to think that he'd be the being who'd pushed Subaru off. If it was him, he wouldn't have tried to kill him in such a dull manner. That was the kind of pessimistic faith he had. Subaru picked up his fallen knife, stepped over Shola's remains, and turned towards the back. For a moment, Subaru was at loss at whether to investigate her body for any clues, but he doubted that he would find anything that would be useful hidden inside her clothing, as she was very scantily dressed. At the same time, his conscience was screaming at him on the matter of further disgracing the dead. She was dead. The dead were no longer his enemies. She just had no luck. That's all there was to it. Subaru didn't even bother doing anything as admirable as clasping his hands together in prayer for her. He left her behind there and slowly walked further into the tower, masking his footsteps as he made his way deeper into the 4th floor, following the trail of destruction. The tower had fallen into a deep silence, to point which not one sound could be heard. He, however, found that stillness rather noisy. A high-pitched ringing noise was tormenting his mind, and he felt as if he could hear the sound of his blood flowing through his body. But strangely enough, his heartbeat was steady, as if his initial agitation had been a lie. Whilst going up the 4th floor, the dark hatred that had boiled inside him still lay stuck to his chest like dirt that wouldn't come off. Even now, for the sake of his own survival, his willingness to murder everyone was unshaken. He'd stab, gouge, and take the life of the first person he would lay his eyes on. He was prepared to do that. Yet, just after he turned around the corner, he found Echidna's corpse with a diagonal slash across it. Now he had no idea just how useful his resolve was going to be in this hellscape. Echidna's body bore a wound from her right shoulder to her left side, as if she'd been cut down in one stroke with some sort of large blade. And as he came to that conclusion, the first thing that popped into his mind was the sword Julius carried. It was a cheap-looking, likely mass-produced sword, but certainly it ought to be plenty to have slashed through the body of a woman as delicate as Echidna. The question remained. He had no idea what reason Julius would have to kill Echidna. When he had been introduced to them, Subaru had heard that Echidna and Julius had a relationship quite like one of a master and a dedicated servant. He'd heard there were some complicated circumstances involved, but in any case, they should have been quite close. Of course, if Julius was some sort of psycho killer who wanted everyone in the tower dead, then perhaps those circumstances meant nothing at all. Subaru, Ua, RHGH. Using the wall to steady himself, Subaru once again succumbed to his stomach's complaints before then lifting his head up. The condition of her corpse was somewhat in a better state than Shola's. Even so, it was a sight that required nerve to witness without looking away. Yet the way she died gave off a completely different impression to Shola's. While it had seemed that after Shola's death her corpse had been abandoned, Echidna's body left him with a sense that respect had been carried out towards the deceased. Putting it bluntly, there was a white cloth that had been placed over her, and her eyelids had been closed as well. Considering the differences between the ways they'd been killed, there was a big discrepancy in the way the deceased had been treated afterwards. Even just thinking which one of these was more normal in this situation made him feel like he was going to be driven crazy. Subaru. Echidna's gone too. Subaru's breath quivered, his voice went hoarse, and he couldn't stop his arms and legs from shaking. In that state, he made just a mental note of the facts in front of him and plunged deeper into the tower in search of survivors to kill. Though perhaps even the reason whether it was the living or the dead he searched for, or for what sake he searched for, had already become nebulous for him. Yet he walked on. Further inside the corridor, Subaru found Ram, her body having been blown away from behind. Her body was in a wretched state, with a gaping hole between the nape of her chest and her lower back. Her wound looked rather similar to that which had killed the desert earthworm. She probably ran down the corridor and been struck in the back as she tried to make her way elsewhere. He could sense a hate-tinged curse coming from her dead face, with her lips which were bitten, leaving behind regret. Subaru vomited again. In the hall where they'd explained the morning's situation to him and eaten breakfast lay the dead bodies of Maylie and Julius. The state in which Julius had perished was one of the most striking ones yet. Traces of blows and cuts inflicted by incredible sharpness were plastered around his entire body. His left arm had been blown off at the elbow, and his wound had been crudely wrapped up and treated using a piece of a cloak. He couldn't find a direct cause to his death. From the wounds across his body, he'd probably died of blood loss, and had the reason he'd fought so desperately until that been for the sake of the little girl who'd collapsed behind him. Subaru vomited yet again. Maylie, who had been slumped against the wall with her hands around her belly, was the only one who had died with a peaceful expression frozen on her face. On her abdomen, which was covered by her small palms, was indeed a gash that was wet with bright red blood. Her cause of death was also probably due to blood loss. She'd been wounded and subsequently lost her life whilst awaiting for salvation in this place. And yet the seemingly peaceful look that had adorned her face in death caused him to refuse to understand even a single bit. Once again, Subaru vomited. A corpse, another corpse, another corpse, another corpse, and yet another corpse. There were corpses around. Only corpses lying around. He couldn't fathom what was going on. The truth behind what was going on was unclear. Ideally speaking, everyone other than Subaru dropping dead should have been the conditions that allowed him some repose. However, he couldn't fathom why everyone was dead when he hadn't even been around. Poor Shola with her head crushed and her whole body sliced up. Echidna, who'd been sliced from shoulder to side, had fallen due to a terrible blow. Ram, whose body had been blown off from the back, died leaving behind her regret and curses. Julius, who'd been left with scars all over his body of the fierce battle that had unfurled and had eventually lost his life. Maylie, who just lost blood from her stomach wound, yielded peacefully to her slow death. What must have happened for this to occur? Would he even be able to accept this situation if someone was behind it? Subaru, Emilia, and Beatrice. He'd found 5 dead bodies, yet there were 2 suspects he hadn't found. Had one of them, or both, conspired to make this happen? Those 2 who'd worried about Subaru when he'd woken up with no memories at the very beginning. Had they concealed killing intent and madness behind their demeanor and thus carried out these acts of murder? He had found 5 dead bodies, white sheets covering 4 of them, with the exception of Shola. All of their bodies, bar Shola's, had been carefully lain to rest on the floor, and they'd even closed their eyes. Respect towards the dead had been shown there. Only Shola's body didn't have that. In the first place, when the hell could this massacre have taken place? Subaru. The blood had dried up, he thought. Barely keeping his footing, Subaru looked around for Emilia and Beatrice's presences, which he'd yet not found in the tower, with each of the circumstances of the dead bodies popping up in his mind as he contemplated. The choking stench of their blood, along with the states each of their corpses had been in, came back to him vividly. It pierced through to the depths of his mind, causing his stomach to heave in pain. However, he was running out of stuff to hurl up. He was so parched that he couldn't muster any spit to spit out the dregs of vomit inside his mouth, and nary even a bead of cold sweat appeared. Subaru's body was completely parched dry, just like their blood. There'd been a ton of it, despite blood being harder to dry than water. It would take blood several, or even dozens of hours to dry, so he could consider that such an amount had passed already since the tragedy broke out. He himself had no idea how much time he'd spent wandering around beneath the desert, but enough time should have passed for that, or well, he wasn't extremely sure. Confusion and chaos. The shackles of his marred awareness screamed at him to do something about this out-of-control situation. He needed to earn his repose. He needed to find it. For that, he needed to reduce the number of suspects. From the remaining 2, if any of those criminals who'd brought this situation about were to die, he would be freed. He entered the green room. The black lizard caught eye of Subaru and gave out a cry. It was the first time since he had came back to this tower that he had found a living creature. Subaru. Ha! What's with this lizard? Seeing that the lizard had survived, Subaru let out a parched smile. He'd hoped that if he was going to meet someone, that it would be a corpse were possible. However, what damned use was it that the survivor he'd met here after all this was the lizard? He gave a click of his tongue and turned around so to leave the room. He didn't have anything to do in rooms where only lizards remained. However, Subaru, quit following me. The black lizard, having shrunk down its massive body, had tried to follow in Subaru's wake when he'd left the room. It was surprisingly large when it stood up, as big as a horse. It plodded along, moving its sharp, clawed feet, following in Subaru's wake. Unable to bear the tension, Subaru waved his arms and threatening it with spittle flying from his mouth. Subaru, it's not like I've got the time to play with you right now. I need to kill all the damn survivors in this tower, if you get in my way. Whilst gripping the large knife in his hand, Subaru stared straight at the lizard. The sharp-featured lizard looked at it in his hand, but quickly turned its gaze back towards him. Subaru, HH. Subaru's voice shook at the way they were ignoring his knife, and instead were staring at him. It's as if they were undaunted by Subaru's murderous hostilities, and that roused the animosity that had been uncomfortably smoldering inside his chest. Subaru, don't you fucking screw about with me. Subaru swung his knife up and plunged it into the lizard as he cried out. The tip of the knife plunged into its jet-black scales. Though at first the knife encountered a bit of resistance, he was able to easily push through it, thrusting it deep into the lizard's body. The lizard stood there, unmoving, with the knife stuck through the left side of its body. The blade dug into its flesh all the way to its hilt, with fresh blooding spilling out from its clearly serious wound. Subaru, how about? Subaru tried to continue by saying this. However, he involuntarily let out a thin, ragged sigh. For the first time, he had taken the action to try kill a living being. And although he felt excited by that fact, and the fact that his heart beating wildly had caused that, there had been a different reason behind why he hadn't been able to finish what he wanted to say. Subaru. Even though the lizard had been stabbed by his knife, it remained unmoving, merely staring at Subaru. It hadn't reacted at all at having been stabbed deeply by his blade, neither in pain nor surprise. Merely the lizard's sharp eyes stared at Natsuki Subaru's handiwork. Those lizard eyes, which he couldn't read the emotions therein, were blaming Natsuki Subaru. Subaru, shit, 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 shit. What the hell, what the hell, what the hell? Scratching his head, Subaru couldn't stand it any longer and lost his shit. While shouting, Subaru took a step back, forgetting even to retrieve his knife that he'd stuck in the lizard. No, he didn't have the courage to touch that knife. The lizard's eyes were terrifying. Subaru, you, those guys except you and those corpses, as well as those guys still living, those guys who I don't even know if they are alive or dead. What on earth are you all cooking up? What are you trying to do? Despite knowing his words were pointless, Subaru still blurted them out to the lizard standing in front of him. As he'd wandered throughout the tower, as he'd wandered through the pitch-black darkness of the underground, as he'd anguished at the fact that he'd been thrown into this world where he couldn't make heads or tails out of it, his gloomy emotions had built up. Subaru, I'm gonna kill every single one of these guys who tries to kill me. I'm gonna deny every single one who tries to depend on me. Don't get me wrong, don't push your luck. It ain't a damn joke, acting like you're so close to me as you please. Subaru, as if I give a damn about any of you, as if I give a damn about what every single one of you are thinking. Every one of you is pushing their own damned agenda on me. If you all have your hands full with your own selves, then I've got my own hands full with myself as well. Shouting and screaming, Subaru began to shed tears without him even realizing, falling down to his knees on the spot. In front of him, the lizard wordlessly looked at him as his body shook and let out of ragged gasps. Subaru had crouched down and pressed his head to the floor, unable to see them. Subaru, like just leave me alone, leave me be by myself. Subaru's choked sobs vacantly echoed through the silent corridor. How long had he spent like this? Several seconds. Dozens of seconds. Several minutes. He couldn't find it in himself to move, but it was with his face pressed to the floor that he suddenly noticed faint, really faint tremors drawing near to him through the floor. Subaru. Ah, lizard. Letter 3-1, letter 3-1. Subaru lifted his face a moment later, seeing the lizard's gaping maw in front of him. Lined with sharp fangs, her maw inched closer towards him. He looked at her, as if it wasn't him in this situation, wondering whether they were going to chew his head up. Subaru. Ha! The lizard picked up Subaru by his left shoulder using her mouth, and without wasting a moment, started to run. His body had been forcibly pulled up from the ground and lifted up. The lizard's sharp fangs had bitten into his shoulder, causing a shriek of pain to escape his mouth. Subaru, higher. They were going to kill him. He was probably going to be killed. Those were its intentions. However, now that it had practically sunk its fangs into his shoulder, the fear he had towards the pain it brought was readily painted over by a feeling of cheap resignation. He was going to have his shoulder eaten, then his body, chewed up like that, and left to die. To die being eaten by a living creature was one of the worst deaths Subaru could possibly imagine. It was just after Subaru's body began to tremble in fear at that presentiment that the hallway that Subaru had just been in was blown away from beneath by an astonishing amount of black haze. He hears a heavy impact which causes dust and debris to scatter around. The fog was overrunning the hallway, engulfing the ceiling, the walls, the floor, reaching out towards Subaru and Patrash as if hunting for prey. Made up of black shadows, it even looked like it had arms. Subaru, shadowy arms. In his mind, he briefly recalled the shape of the woman who had tormented him by the stairs. A woman who was drenched in shadows, her face was hidden by a black veil, had thoroughly played with his heart, engraving fear in him. The shadows that had been engulfing the room were akin to the ones that the woman wore. It was laying waste to the tower's passageway as it pleases chasing after the fleeing lizard and Subaru. Subaru, you. The lizard didn't answer, but with Subaru held in its mouth, it ran through the passageway at full gallop. Subaru, who was looking in the opposite direction to where they were headed, could not see where they were desperately trying to flee to. Instead, he could only look straight at the menace of the looming shadow, making the blood inside his body freeze. So it was either be devoured by that shadow or meet a fate that would be more terrible than death. Intuitively making his mind up, Subaru pushed himself further into the fangs of the lizard which were digging into his shoulder. His throat quivered in pain, but if he were to be shaken off, he'd be done for. At this point, his hatred for the lizard was no more than a pointless obsession. Lizard. Letter 3-1, letter 3-1. They heard the sound of the passageway exploding as the shadow blocked their way. Taking a snap decision, a split second later, the lizard turned back down the aisle, diving into a side corridor just before they could be swallowed up by the shadow. They galloped at full speed, trying to shake off the shadow that was surging towards them with the force of a muddy stream. However, as they kept running away from the shadow, the area that appeared in front of them was Subaru, the spiral staircase. The huge spiral staircase which connected the fourth and fifth floors of the tower. Subaru was lost for words as they emerged there, in that area. Naturally, he could see the fifth floor far off down below from the height they were at. He did feel some of the fear of witnessing the scene where he'd fallen to his death before, but not only that. Right below him, the staircase was being engulfed by the shadows of black and was beginning to sink down, meaning that the lower half of the tower was in the process of being enveloped by these colossal amounts of shadows, sinking it. Subaru. There's no escaping down there, but there's no escaping behind us as well. The bottom of the tower was already under the shadow's control. The dark, muddy stream was looming towards them from the insides of the passageway that they'd fled from. They were absolutely, completely cornered. All that was left was the absurd choice of whether he'd be devoured by the shadows or killed in some other manner. Subaru. For a second, the idea of suicide flitted across his mind. Wouldn't it be much better to choose how he died, rather than be swallowed by those shadows? Perhaps for him, there were still possibilities remaining even if he were to die. Subaru. Erg. As soon as he thought about taking his own life, Subaru's body started to tremble. What if by some chance, choosing to kill himself, would it end it here? What would he do then? He did sort of believe now that he was redoing things, but did he really have a guarantee that this would keep holding true? Or how could he say that this wasn't a precognitive dream just like he'd thought at first? All the way up to the last time, he'd had some painful precognitive dreams. So if this was his last one, then things would end for him here. Why did he even have to die in the first place? He hadn't done anything wrong. Why was he paying with his life here? Why he? Subaru, no, I don't want to die. Subaru yelled that out without any shame. There was no one in the tower who could hear him. Only the dead and the missing were here. So the only one who heard him was this jet-black lizard, who wasn't a human being. Lizard. Letter 3-1, letter 3-1. Whilst holding Subaru by its fangs, the lizard gave a choked, almighty roar. Immediately, the lizard broke into a fierce sprint and leapt towards the void of the spiral staircase, so to give the muddy stream of tendrils looming behind them the slip. Naturally, no matter how much momentum the leap carried, they would eventually lose it, with gravity catching them into a free fall to be swallowed by the shadows below. However, the lizard had come up with an ingenious idea to overcome this desperate situation. The lizard dug two of its pointed feet into the tower wall. Of course, even if they were clinging to the wall, sooner or later they would fall, that is, if the wall was vertical. The lizard ran frantically across the wall, letting out a roar. The colossal tower was starting to tilt due to the shadows engulfing it from its base. The lizard scaled its way across the wall, which was lurching to its side, practically perpendicular. Subaru, no way. What was going on? Everything was swaying. Subaru could not make sense of what the complete picture here was. However, it was clear that this black lizard was spending its remaining strength trying to survive. He could clearly tell that they were giving it their all for that. Subaru, you. Suddenly, the dark stream of tendrils completely enveloped the place where the lizard had just been. It searched for signs of its prey that it had failed to swallow, and realized that they were running up the wall. It rushed towards them. The lizard dodged aside a split second later, barely managing to avoid its attack. A violent shockwave and a fierce howling wind accompanied the attack, leaving behind a large hole in the side of the tower. Without hesitating, the lizard slipped into the hole that had opened up in the wall. Subaru was violently jolted left and right, losing his sense of balance, no longer able to perceive the world properly. Though even among all this, he knew that the lizard's drastic maneuvers were to make sure that Subaru wasn't hit by any of the Shadow's attacks. He also knew that they weren't showing any consideration to the fact that their own body was being whittled away by the Shadow. They came out of the large hole. A sandy breeze immediately greeted him after, with darkness filling his field of view. He could feel the outside air against him. Had they have jumped out of the tower? Once again, the lizard ran up the tilting tower wall, frantically trying to escape from the shadow Subaru. You were. The lizard's thin neck was stooped over, and the next moment, a strong breeze buffeted them. The lizard let go of Subaru, pulling its fangs out of his shoulders. Subaru's eyes flashed in pain as he felt the sensation of the fangs being removed from his flesh. However, he ignored his pain, as well as the strong wind which was blowing against him. His body had been struck by something hard. After being bumped around, tumbled about and thrown down, letting out a winded breath, Subaru opened his eyes. He caught a glimpse of the night sky flickering in front of him. Subaru. Ah, eh. Subaru lifted himself up from the floor in a panic. The view he was seeing was far beyond what his imagination could comprehend. He looked around at his surroundings. He was in an area that was made from the same stuff as the tower. Despite that, he was definitely outside. He could see that this space was attached to the outer wall of the tower, resembling something like a balcony. They had gone through the hole, rushed up the wall, and thrown him here. Subaru, the lizard. Shuddering, Subaru rushed over to where he'd tumbled down and looked beneath him. There, he witnessed the last moments of the lizard who'd thrown him here. The falling lizard was swallowed up by the black shadows, which were even darker than its scales, and vanished from sight. He had stabbed them with his knife due to his crazed anger, yet they'd not even cared about their pain and fear. They had brought Subaru up to this balcony, only to then be swallowed by the shadow. Swallowed by those shadows, where a fate worse than death awaited. Subaru. What the hell, what the hell, what the hell, what the hell? Subaru had no idea what was going on anymore. Subaru. He watched the bottom of the tower gradually get engulfed by the shadows, up on the balcony. Suddenly, a white bird perched itself at the edge of the balcony beside him. The white bird looked at Subaru with unfeeling eyes. At the presence of the large bird, Subaru gasped out a ha. The suspects who had died, the suspects who were nowhere to be seen, the lizard that had helped him at the cost of their life. And now, a white bird had suddenly appeared in this place little by little. The tower was being swallowed by the shadow, disappearing in front of his eyes. Feeling that the end was approaching, Subaru sat down in exhaustion. He now understood that the lizard had been ever so desperately trying to save him. Even so, their expectations had been in vain. They just bought him a little more time before death dawned on him. Still slumped down, Subaru suddenly lifted his head up. There was someone behind him. It wasn't the bird, or the lizard, or the shadow. The sign of someone living was standing there. Subaru, the hell are you? Subaru asked this in a very faint tone of voice, having nary even the strength to look back behind. The one who stood behind him laughed in response. Then in a voice he'd never heard before. Next, try guessing, hero. For a second, Subaru heard a whooshing noise. Then his field of vision jumped up and started to spin rapidly in front of him. His body felt awfully light. He was soaring up into the sky like a bird. And then he realized what had happened. The someone from behind had decapitated him. Amelia, Subaru. Hey, Subaru, are you okay? The connection between his head, that should have been lopped off, and the change in his consciousnesses happened in an instant. Subaru woke up on a soft ivy bed. He was greeted by the chiming voice of a silver bell, along with its owner having not found her, no matter how hard he'd searched. Subaru, Emmy, Leah, Emilia. Oh, Subaru, thank goodness, you woke up. I was really worried about you. Subaru opened his eyes slightly. In front of him, there was Emilia, a relieved expression resting on her face. She had her hand to her chest, seeing Subaru wake up, with a smile grooved in her lips. He looked at Emilia. Her beautiful, slender neck was frightfully dazzling. Feeling rather parched, Subaru wordlessly stretched out his hands around Emilia's slender neck. It easily fit between Subaru's hands. Emilia, Subaru, what's the matter? Emilia was staring blankly, her eyes widened in surprise, with her neck having been grabbed by Subaru. She was surprised by Subaru's reaction, but she didn't make any movements to try and get him off her. If he'd felt like it, he could have definitely ended up breaking her neck with ease, were he to just put some muscle into it. Even though her life was held within Subaru's grasp, Emilia's reaction was awfully slow, moreover Beatrice. Emilia, apparently it seems that Subaru is still half asleep, I suppose. He's acting all easy regardless of worrying us. In fact, Subaru. Subaru let go of Emilia's neck immediately as a voice called out to him from right beside him. He glanced over, his eyes meeting Beatrice's as she folded her short arms together by his bedside, her nostrils flaring in absolute shock. Emilia gave her a strained smile and said, "Yeah, Emilia, though it's better for you to be half asleep than it being anything else more serious. When I found you collapsed on the ground, Beatrice was nearly in tears." "Beatrice, you didn't have to go and say that, I suppose." Beatrice's face grew red, angered by Emilia's unmalicious comment. The two of them, locked in that exchange, had absolutely no idea what kind of urge had caught hold of Subaru just a moment ago. Before that, they'd shown no recognition of the situation being dangerous. This was also evident in their attitude towards Subaru, meaning that I'm. Immediately after Natsuki Subaru, had lost his memories, that's to say. As soon as Natsuki Subaru had realized that he'd been summoned to another world, he'd came back to this very place. And at the same time, "Letter 3-1, Subaru. It's you." Subaru hastily turned around at the sound of her whinny and breath, her figure coming into view. Sitting docilely in one corner of the green room was a large black creature, the lizard, who'd done so much for him as he'd been on the verge of being swallowed by the shadow, was sitting there, cool as you like. "Beatrice, I'm a little unsatisfied, in fact. Finding you should have been mine and Emilia's exploit, I suppose." "Emilia, no need to sulk about it. It's great, isn't it? Subaru and Patrash get on really well." Behind him, Subaru could hear Beatrice and Emilia talking to one another. Subaru did not care to join in. He was too busy tightly embracing the large body of the lizard in front of him, immensely thankful that they were here. He was eternally grateful that back then they'd been the only one who had not tried to hurt Subaru. Arc 6, Chapter 43, The Tower of the Living. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray Zero, starting a life in a different world from zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop, you Archbishop, proofread by Furuta, /u/ Grace Hupperd Wintry, /u/ Wintry Onazim, /u/ Azim fan art created by Oeri. Think. Think. He must think. Subaru. Natsuki Subaru kept thinking as he wrapped his arms around her whole body, which was lined by hard, rough scales. The things that had happened in his own body, the ridiculous events inside the tower, the people who were attempting to kill him, the people who were attempting to kill ones other than himself, distinguishing between friends and foe, and Beatrice. Subaru, is that enough, in fact? Have you calmed down, I suppose? Subaru. Subaru turned his head slowly towards the voice he had heard from behind him, which had interrupted his thoughts. Beatrice, the one who had called out to him, was sitting upon the ivy bed. The girl, who seemed to be making a pouty face, was dangling her feet. Her hand was connected with Emilia's, who sat beside her. She was glaring at Subaru. Seeing that look, Subaru's face stiffened a little. "Emilia, Beatrice, don't speak like that." I guess Subaru felt surprised when he woke up. I think it's inevitable that he'd go hug Patrash. However, Emilia smiled as she denied Subaru's misguided thoughts. Hearing her point this out, Beatrice proceeded to suddenly turn away from Subaru and Emilia. "Beatrice, it doesn't mean I am angry, in fact. It's not just to do with your sudden awakening, I suppose." Betty and Emilia were also worried for Subaru. The Earth Dragon isn't the only one that worries about you, in fact. "Emilia, yeah, I was really worried about you." Stroking Beatrice's head with her still facing away from them, Emilia looked at Subaru and raised her eyebrows. Subaru held his breath as he looked into Emilia's amethyst eyes. His chest gave a sharp pang to the deep, deep affection in her look. And at the same time, a strange sense of irritation grew in him. He was reminded. They were hoping in Natsuki Subaru, the one that was here. He would feel uneasy were he not able to shoulder that burden. "But however, Subaru, I am sorry to worry you all. I'm sorry, I heavily apologize. It is not like me to hug a girl that is half asleep, and this even is a thing to hide my embarrassment." Relaxing his stiffened face, Subaru replied whilst easing his face into a smile. To that answer, Beatrice and Emilia exchanged looks, and Emilia, "But Patrash is a girl as well, you know." Subaru, "Hey, wait, Patrash is quite the special entry, or rather, the sort of target which we are bonded by different sorts of bonds, or rather, the top seed in an unconditional second-round entry." Beatrice, HMPH, that is unpardonable, I suppose. I don't get why you're only giving special treatment to that Earth dragon. I would like an explanation, I suppose. Subaru. Hey, don't try to stand in the same ring as her, that Earth dragon. Subaru returned his answer whilst looking carefully at Beatrice and Emilia's reaction, as Beatrice's face was growing ever more in displeasure. Receiving his answer, it seemed that the two of them did not feel like anything was out of place. Feeling relieved about that, Subaru turned his head to look towards the lizard no, to Patrash, who he had been stroking. Subaru, truly, only you are special, Patrash. Patrash, the black ground dragon, closed its eyes, while letting out a small neigh as Subaru placed his forehead against her head. Emilia, so Subaru, are you really feeling okay? Subaru, ah yes, I am okay, no problemo at all. I'm sorry for worrying you all. I think perhaps the exhaustion got to me, and as things are rather the case with that, I must have accidentally fallen asleep. Emilia, yeah, but you'll tell us if you are tired, right? Because you can take it easy. Emilia brought this reminder to Subaru, who had answered in tune whilst rotating his arms. Subaru answered back to those words with a lackadaisical, "Okay, Captain," whilst immersing himself in full thought. Subaru led Beatrice and Emilia now, and kept walking through the 4th floor of the tower. They were going to the 4th floor hall. Their purpose was to dine in brief. The three of them were walking with their bodies, not holding any urgent issues. This time, Subaru was determined to take a different approach from last time. That is, he would not confide to Emilia and the others about his amnesia. In other words, the situation would require Subaru to act as if he were impersonating another. Wetting his parched lips with his tongue as his strain exacerbated, Subaru had kept observing how things were around Emilia and the others. Subaru had still not figured out what kind of character the Natsuki Subaru for the others was. It should be impossible to do something like tracing a stranger in such circumstances, but by all rights, it should be a different story to impersonate himself in conditions that would otherwise not be established. No matter where he went, Natsuki Subaru is simply just Natsuki Subaru. Even if he had spent a year in this parallel world, Subaru knew that the fundamentals of human nature would remain unchanged in himself. Then, if he just paid heed to the relationship afterwards, then he should be able to trace the same sort of character to a good enough extent. And then, whilst tracing Natsuki Subaru, he would see what would happen now. What happened in this tower? Who would kill him? And who was killed by who? For now, Subaru would verify the likelihood of the trigger that drove him to his own death by hiding his amnesia. In other words, would his opponent kill him because of his amnesia, or did it have nothing to do with that? Be that as it may, in all honesty, he didn't have much expectations. Subaru's lost memories, it's hard to imagine the situation with or without some troubles cropping up. However, of course, there are exceptions. Subaru, the case in which the criminal would be a guy who would be troubled if my memories were to come back. Subaru remembered seeing it in a movie before. Eyewitnesses who had witnessed the murder scene lost their memory due to some sort of shock. The criminal who could observe the scene would be in trouble if their memories were to return. That's why in the movie the criminal tried to kill the witnesses as well. It can definitely be thought that a similar situation was occurring to Subaru currently. Foremost, the circumstances in which Subaru had lost his memories were unclear. Subaru. Emilia, did you find me collapsed in the 3rd floor of the library? Emilia, yeah, that's right. You were on the floor of the library, Beatrice, and I carried you to the green room in a great hurry. Beatrice. Well, since it was Emilia that carried you, Betty was just there to help out behind her, in fact. Subaru gazed at Emilia's slender arms as he received Beatrice's supplementary explanation, laced with a sigh. If he were to settle down and think properly about it, it was a mystery to Subaru how these two people had carried him all the way back from the library to the green room. Beatrice didn't give a single fragment of indication that she was suited to do any heavy lifting, and from what he had been told at face value, he was also wondering how this Emilia that believed in a fake had carried Subaru so easily. Emilia, what's wrong? Subaru, nothing. Well, in any case, you were a great help. I've said it many times, but sorry to have troubled you. Emilia, not sorry, I think you would be nicer. Bowing his head in apology, Emilia placed her palm on Subaru's forehead as he tried to lower it. Subaru's eyes widened at the touch of Emilia's smooth fingers, hastily muttering out an I guess you're right. As Subaru had thought so far, the feeling of distance between him and Emilia was a little too strong. Therefore, he did not hesitate and let her touch him. Come to think of it, when Subaru had woken up, he had also placed his hands around her neck. Nevertheless, she was looking at Subaru with a peaceful expression. Subaru, no matter what kind of livelihood, I will always feel a great sense of distance with this girl. Or perhaps Emilia, contrary to her awfully well-prepared appearance, was just all too used to strangeness. Surely she is gentle to everyone as well, and probably she didn't feel any barriers between anyone as a result of brought up and loved. She was likely a girl who had been sheltered as a child, unaffected by any significant hardship. With this impression, Subaru was satisfied with this sense of distance. If someone isn't burdened with even one regret, then they can believe in only the virtue of others and keep your eyes all the time prim and beautiful. Or was even that all just an act? Whilst looking at Emilia and Beatrice side by side, Subaru was deeply immersed within his thoughts. Simply, when he deconstructed it down to the bare bones, when it came to Subaru's last moments and tragedy in the tower within the last loop, the suspects most worth keeping an eye on were Emilia and Beatrice. Subaru had seen the corpses of Shola, Echidna, Ram, Julius, and Melee. He had been saved by Patrash and brought out of the lurching tower. However, he had had his head lopped off by someone standing behind him and lost his life. He had yet to see Beatrice or Emilia die. Of course, even if the two of them had conspired together, then he didn't know if the possibility of the killing of the 5 people still remained. Subaru's diagnosis was that it was difficult. But if, for argument's sake, another person existed, if the number had increased to 3, then the story probably changed. Next, try and guess, hero. Subaru had no memory of the unknown voice which had spoken those words at the end. In the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the swirl of confusion, in the midst of despairing of wanting the end to come already, he had heard this voice. That, a third person cooperating with Emilia and Beatrice, could that be the identity of an unseen third person that carried Subaru from the library to the green room? That's why these two were spouting out such codswallop. Emilia. Ah, Subaru, you're going too far. Subaru. Ha! Apparently, Subaru had walked past the room whilst he was immersed in his own thoughts. Emilia had stopped in front of the room and had placed her arm on Subaru's shoulder to prevent him from walking too far. In an instant, Subaru felt a peculiarly uncomfortable, and he looked at Emilia's arm which had grabbed his shoulder. And then he took her hand and shook it. Beatrice, Subaru, what on earth are you doing, I suppose? Subaru. Ah, just a little experiment. Emilia, won't you do a contest of strength with me? Emilia. But I think we'd better have it stop from being dangerous. There had been no sense of resistance when he had shook her hand itself, and Emilia had shown a sense of denial to the contest of strength. Seeing this behavior, Subaru became more convinced and strongly said, I ask this of you. If Emilia's arm indeed did not have the strength to carry Subaru, then his deduction from before would give him a fairly strong guarantee. So now, Emilia should not think that she is suspected. He would need to make best use of this advantage. A chance like this only existed right now. Subaru, I ask this of you because it's of utmost necessity. Emilia, since Subaru sounds quite serious, it must be quite the important thing, right? Receiving Subaru's supplication, the worried Emilia pursed her lips and gave a nod with a determined look. Seeing that, Subaru clenched his fist with all his heart, saying, Ready. If after he proved her weakness, then Subaru's deduction would progress far further. Beatrice, well, do something different like an arm-pull match instead so that it doesn't become dangerous, in fact. Is that okay, I suppose? Subaru, ah, that's okay. Emilia, okay, got it. In accordance to Beatrice's instructions, Subaru and Emilia shook hands and made some space between them. They took each other's right arm, and then the two of them stared into each other's eyes. And then Beatrice, ready go, in fact. TL, note, interesting note maybe. Beatrice says this using English, probably something she picked from Subaru. On Beatrice's signal, Subaru pulled Emilia's arm with all his might. Subaru, uwo. His grip strength could crush apples. His grip strength could keep swinging a kendo sword even with no target. His grip strength could keep on doing push-ups. The strength of a man against that of a woman's. He poured all of this into this battle. Yet Emilia's arm did not move an inch. Subaru's deduction in which he doubted Beatrice, and Emilia was set back to square one. However, Subaru had only confirmed that Emilia and the others had carried him without the help of a third party. It didn't mean that the suspicions of the two girls had been cleared away. Subaru had still yet to have seen the two girls, corpses. The tower's mass killings, that situations criminal being different, was something that was still not decided. Subaru, after all, is it purely the guy who came out in the end the one who is the criminal? They had certainly killed Subaru. But was that guy a criminal insofar to have carried out everyone's mass murders by those hands, as well as the shadows which had engulfed the tower? All the ones killed were each killed in different ways. What becomes of that explanation? The ways they had died in was easy to understand merely from glimpsing. Echidna had suffered damage from a single stroke from something sharp. Julius had had several wounds piled up on him, and hadn't merely died from blood loss. There was no doubt that everyone had died in different manners, fighting someone. That should be it, but... So, what the hell was that prank about? A voice called out as if amazed to Subaru, who was deep in thought. That voice was Ram's, who was finishing preparing breakfast. As she set up the table with water and preserved food, she demanded an explanation on the contest of strength with Emilia Subaru's experiment, which he had carried out. The contest of strength, which had been for determining proof of Subaru's deduction, had its curtain closed by the shape of his defeat to Emilia. It was Ram joining up with them in front of the hall, which had given an impetus for its end. When she saw Subaru's struggles, red in face, she had put an end to things with a curt, "Are you stupid?" "Emilia, I was asked by Subaru. I don't quite understand why, but I am sure it had some really important meaning to it. Isn't that right, Subaru?" "Ram, is that so?" The reason given to Ram, all I could see was wanting to hold Emilia-sama's hand. "Subaru, you're overthinking it. If you want, next time do you want to do a contest of strength with me?" "Ram, disgusting." "Subaru, why?" Ram spoke her awfully cruel impression of him to Emilia, who had tried to stick up for him. If he tried to dispel it, in an instant his position would get considerably worse. An undoubtedly vicious cycle. "Ram, ha!" Giving a scornful laugh, Ram diverted her attention back to setting the table. Seeing her retreating figure, Subaru was secretly relieved that it seemed as if his current behavior did not give off anything that would feel out of place. It seemed as if he hadn't yet taken an attitude which separated him from the Natsuki Subaru known by the girls. This made him feel relieved and also amazed. Doing this, he mustn't tip his awareness towards a different bearing, not even by a little Subaru. Up. In an instant, Subaru bore the vomiting sensation that suddenly welled up in him. Subaru put his hand to his mouth. Its cause was Ram, who was diligently working with her back turned towards them. The girl's retreating figure caused him to keep blinking with the manner of death scorching his eyelids. Ram had received a blow from behind, in which part of her stomach had been blown apart, killing her. The shadow of her death were coated with regret and anger, distorting and cursing her pitiful facial expression. A lamentation was etched into her soul, which would attempt to tear any who witnessed it from limb to limb. The owner of that corpse moved right before his eyes, and certainly was alive. In all honesty, from the moment he first came across her at the hall, he had been desperate to accept a contradiction between reality and that uncomfortable feeling. He felt more or less relieved that he could use the lapse of dizziness he had experienced as an excuse, thanks to his exertions in the contest of strength with Emilia just before. But he had overlooked Ram's facial expression. Grinding his teeth together, Subaru directs his awareness into getting back strong self-control. From then on, all of the people related to the tower one by one filed into the hall. He mustn't overlook each of their expressions, because that in itself would be the key to breaking the situation. "Wooer, what a nice meal, Tilda. A meal fit for a king in this refreshing morning. I sure know I'm living for this, Tilda." The first one of them showed up in the hall while saying out this stuff noisily. A beautiful woman whose long black braided hair was swinging about, who was unabashedly exposing most of her huge breasts, Shola, showed up in the hall still with her head definitely attacked to her body. She was looking at the meal which had been prepared by Ram, but then she noticed Subaru within the room and she spoke. "Shola, master, good morning. Did you sleep well yesterday, Tilda?" All of a sudden, her facial expression lit up, and she rushed over towards where he was with the vigor of, say, a puppy. and then, grabbing Subaru's arm, she tightly embraced his chest. Subaru, Shola, by the way, slept incredibly well. After such a long time, I had dreams and such from the former days, Tilda. Me and Master and Mother, and then and Theen Subaru. I get your weight. I will give a good listen to the story about your dreams sometime, but did you happen to see me this morning? Shola, again with the awfully weightless questions. How typical of Master. Disentangling himself somehow from her arms which had embraced him, Subaru inquired this as he escaped from Shola. In response to that, Shola gave a cheerful laugh. Shola, honestly, what Master sees is no big deal. Just like the olden days, to me you're always the sexiest guy. It's a marriage proposal awaited for 400 years. Subaru, talk about patience. Generally speaking, for that joke it'd be good if it is nothing. Shola, is that so? If so, I do not mind as well, Tilda. Without a desired response, Subaru withdrew his doubts regarding Shola while sensing some relief mingled with some traces of discouragement. And as he did, the next suspect, Meili, showed up in the room. Meili, Yarn, good morning. I'm feeling sleepy this morning, Tuo. The girl who came through the entrance gave a sweet yawn, covering her mouth with her hand. Even so, she had taken great care to upkeep her personal appearance, and he certainly admired the little girl's sense of beauty. Greatly different to Subaru, who was just content in ruffling his hair up and washing his face. In any case, Subaru. Good morning, Meili. You overslept this morning, huh? Meili. When slowing down and thinking about it, I feel like I have no reason to get up at the same time as One-san and the others. This tower doesn't really have anything to do with me. Beatrice, a girl who's proposing such ill-natured things, in fact. In general, unless Betty and the others complete the trial so to leave the tower, then you can't leave this tower either, I suppose. Meili, well, that is true, but having a bone to pick with her yawning excuses, Meili pursed her lips at Beatrice's opinion. As she said that, she shifted her attention to Shola and Subaru, who were near the wall. She gave a wave, accompanied by a smile. Seeing that, Subaru raised his eyebrow, and then he returned the wave. Subaru, am I overthinking it as usual in having doubting even as far as a dead child? Shola, Master, when troubled, you return back to the basis, staring with from how you jab. Subaru, what is that teaching? Shola, it's Master's teachings. Subaru, it's no wonder I thought it was useless. Listening to this monologue, Subaru dodged Shola's frivolities as he shuddered in his heart. In any case, he couldn't get a response he desired, even from Meili. Then, the only things which remained were just two more people who could test to see whether this plan was at all fruitful. Good morning. With that, the last two people missing entered the room together. Echidna and Julius. Echidna, who was wrapped in a white fox scarf, walked into the hall with Julius beside her. They each in turn greet Emilia, Ram, and the others, and exchange words of good morning. Meanwhile, Julius, who had been walking behind Echidna, saw Subaru standing near the back of the room, and his face stiffened. He suddenly averted his eyes and drove Subaru out of his awareness. Subaru, you. Julius' reaction was quite close to one Subaru was seeking, and as no one other person had shown such a reaction, it was very likely that he had no choice but to say that it was him who had displayed the most blunt reaction. Subaru, Shola, I have a small favor to ask you. Subaru faintly muttered this. The remains of hatred, as if boiled with the flames of anger that would not extinguish, were there. The breakfast at the hall started and ended with the meeting regarding the explanation that Echidna equals Anastasia. As he made his face into something like as if hearing it for the first time to the surprised reactions of Emilia and the others, Subaru was impressed with the way the world had went ahead like, so when he hadn't talked about his amnesia. So far, mistaking what is reality and not had been piling up, and Subaru almost can't comprehend his own special characteristics, which make him return by death. However, just the same as time leaps that are often in fiction, the problems which do not involve Subaru will proceed the same as usual. He understood that changes in the affected problems were born. In other words, up until the last time he had been involved in the core of their discussions due to his amnesia. The reality in which the individual called Echidna, lodging in the body of the young girl called Anastasia, had by no means been delved deeply into during their talks. Even this time around, there would be no such thing like finding the problem's solution or something that would reveal new facts. The changes are considered to occur only in Subaru's actions. If he wanted to dramatically advance the situation, Subaru would need to proactively do stuff. Therefore, Subaru, Julius, I'd like to have a couple of words with you. Breakfast ended, and as they all tried to file out of the hall, Subaru called out to Julius so that he'd stop. Julius stopped in his tracks at that call, turning his head to look at Subaru. Subaru craned his neck up to look at him when they were facing each other, as Julius was quite tall. However, if he were to lose to that intimidating presence, Subaru would stick his chest out all the more as he and Julius glared at each other. Perceiving his disposition, Julius spilled a weary sigh from his thin lips and said, "Julius, what is it? Shouldn't you rest until noon, as Emilia-sama suggested?" Julius. Words were something he had gotten from Emilia's proposal back at breakfast. Apparently, it seemed that Emilia had been worried about unseen fatigue wearing everyone down, and had taken up the opinion that Subaru had been exhausted and had slept in the library because of it. In fact, although this wasn't in Subaru's memories, this party had just managed to cross the desert a few days ago. Though Subaru had failed to cross the desert in just a few steps, it would have probably relatively difficult to fulfill that. This too could be said to be a change caused from Subaru's speech. Even trivial words sometimes can derail that day's schedule. He must take care in what he says and does. With that in his chest, Subaru would confront Julius head-on, and tucking his chin in response to his words, he said, "Subaru, I want to talk about last night." The effect of these words was immediate. Receiving Subaru's words, great emotions floated in his yellow eyes. Seeing the immediate effect his response had brought, Subaru deepened his belief in his own deduction. "Subaru, come. Let's change location." Julius, all right. Julius followed along with a look of resignation at Subaru's invitation, which he gave whilst jerking his chin. Just like that, Subaru led Julius and brought him to a suitable place for conversation in a room on the 4th floor. Naturally, it was a secret talk in which others couldn't be allowed to butt in. Subaru. Well, I wonder where shall I start from? Inside this cramped room, Subaru turned his head around and confronted Julius. There was a slight feeling of tension, but he didn't want to make a mistake such as revealing that. The thought that he should to some extent stand emotionally superior allowed him to show his boldness. On the other hand, the way Julius looked was complex. Reading what lay in heart was difficult, but it seemed to be something that mustn't be a feeling of composure that had persisted from the place of breakfast before. "Subaru, first of all, about last night. To start things off, Subaru abruptly cut to the main point in an introductory manner. Currently, he has the emotional upper hand, but his opponent has an overwhelming advantage with what he knows. In the first place, Subaru didn't really know all too much about what had transpired the night before. Nevertheless, perhaps last night, Subaru and Julius must have done something in the library. As a result of that something, Subaru thought that perhaps he had lost his memories because of that. Julius, about last night, repeating Subaru's words, Julius closed his eyes, which were bordered by long eyelashes. Subaru consciously kept breathing out deep, long breaths as he stood in front of the handsome man. He mustn't be overwhelmed. At least, it's that his feeling was to not lose. Julius, when it comes to that talk, we said it was a thing that ended at that place. At least that's what I was thinking, but is it different for you? Subaru, not quite. I mustn't have grasped it. Seeing Julius join in the talk, Subaru replied in turn. Julius' voice was devoid of any intonation, and so to speak he was careful so that he didn't reveal more emotions than necessary. Of course, when it came to Subaru receiving that, he chose the option of snapping at it. Julius grasped it. I see, well, that sounds just like you. In short, you're saying you want me to postpone the feelings I hold and solve the issues of your own self, is that? Isn't that a little too selfish? Subaru, that's a little off, and that's not what we're talking about. I'm certainly not happy with it, but are you trying to look happy about it? We're both walking around with anger in our hearts, and you're saying I have to look like nothing's wrong. You think I could do that? Julius. Well then, exactly what other option is there? Julius had been quietly keeping a check on his emotions, but little by little, emotion started to flow out from his voice. Subaru could feel Julius staring at him with a furious gaze. Subaru, of course, was still unaware of the details behind Julius' outburst. What choice did Subaru want to hear? What kind of choice had Julius taken regarding Subaru with him holding such fury? And when it came to Subaru, how did he let Julius choose that choice? Julius, my feelings are as I said last night, and I am not going to keep mentioning it, since I hadn't even noticed you and Anastasia-sama, and your Kanaivari with Echidna. Subaru, me and my Kanaivari with Echidna. An unexpected fact had leapt out, and this time it was Subaru who had been caught unawares. By the information he had at the present, Subaru was supposed to be part of a group with Emilia at the top. Julius and Echidna in their situation, he had been in a master and servant sort of role with Anastasia, who was the original owner of Echidna's body. He also heard that they were in an opposing sort of relationship with the girls, if he looked at the big picture. But he had said Subaru had been conniving with Echidna. Julius, I know you did not have bad intentions doing that. Even if it's Echidna, I can't say it's enough, but we spoke. She can be trusted. No, there is no other way but to trust her. Subaru, Julius, I have nothing except for pursuing that possibility in order to save Anastasia-sama. Even if we get her back, and even if that lady doesn't remember me. Julius uttered these words, an awfully lonely tone of voice tinging his expression. Subaru had heard about his circumstances as well. Just like Ram's sleeping younger sister, and many people from many different towns, Julius too was afflicted by this. He had been told that they had faced an awful experience similar to a curse in which they are forgotten by others. Even if Echidna returned control to the rightful owner of the body, it would be highly unlikely that Anastasia would remember her knight, Julius. Even so, Julius, I haven't changed what I've set out to do. I don't know what on earth you want to drag out from me, but let me tell you just this beforehand. Subaru, what is it? Julius, for goodness sake, please do not make me miserable in front of you again. As soon as Subaru heard Julius's feeble voice, no words escaped him. However, in the back of his chest, there was just a feeling of discomposure. Subaru kept silent. Julius took a look at Subaru, loosening his lips so that he could let out a faint sigh. Julius, it seems apparent this will be a barren exchange from here. Saying that, Julius turned to face away from Subaru and was about to leave the room. Then, just before leaving the room, Julius stopped just once, and while still not turning his head, he said, Julius, last night's talk that was said left me quite shocked. What ought I do if you were to speak an apology? Subaru, if I were to apologize. Julius, back then, I wonder how I would have replied back to you, though even that is something I don't know anymore. Julius left the room, leaving behind the echo of self-derision in that mutter. After making sure that he wasn't in sight, Subaru let out a long sigh. He suddenly felt exhausted, as if a great stone had been placed on his back. He was sweating copiously. He felt like he had become a vehemently detestable person. Shola, master, was that okay with you? Shola showed up and peered into the room. Subaru let out a ha, seeing her quite indifferent manner. And then, placing his hand to his forehead, he nodded his head with her. It was okay. Subaru, in that state he is in, perhaps Julius didn't have anything to do with the library. But the distrust in myself sure grew still a little bit stronger. Shola, I don't really get it, but was I useful for you, master? Subaru, indeed. Thanks to you, I was able to face Julius and get some peace of mind. Shola, hey, that's good Tilda then, master. Shola was delighted. She was making her body squirm and her cheeks were blushed in red. She was making her way towards Subaru. And then she nervously stretched her hands out. Shola, I want a really tight hug as a reward. Subaru, no way. Shola, how mean. Master, didn't you say you'd listen to what I'd say if I didn't deviate from the reward level? Subaru, that wish goes far beyond my pure and innocent heart. Subaru bluntly rejected Shola's excessive hopes and dreams for close skin-to-skin contact. Nonetheless, it was true that Shola had been lying in wait, giving him enough composure in his heart to confront Julius. When he had called out to Julius, Subaru had kept Shola in wait in the adjoining room as backup. The reason he had chosen her was because between all of the other girls, she seemed to have the best athleticism, as well as that she seemed to listen to favors due to her likability of Subaru. It was as a result of calculation that she seemed willing to help him without asking too many questions. Other than that, from amongst the suspects, the girl, whose dead body he had found first, was the least likely to pose a danger from all of them. In any case, Subaru, my thoughts that it was Julius who was the opponent who stole my memories at the library was way off the mark. This morning, He had thought it was almost a certainty from his reaction when he'd seen Subaru. But those line of thinking had been off. Despite what happened at the library, the Julius of some time ago didn't really touch much on the incident in which his memories of him had gone. Having said that, his emotions were all too natural for an act. It was quite uncertain what thing of speculation the connivere with Echidna was due to Natsuki Subaru. But at least, it was a good enough reason for Subaru now to harbor distrust to the him of last night. Before his memories had been lost, it seemed like there had been quite the exchange of tempestuous words between him, Echidna, and Julius, Subaru. You, what on earth were you doing, and who on earth targeted you, Natsuki Subaru? Shola, master, how about you jump to my chest? Come hug my busty body, master. Subaru, that wish is beyond naive. Shola, master is mean tilde. Speaking of things he had no clue about, Subaru also had no clue why Shola showed him such a strange affection. Why did she dearly love Subaru to this extent? It appeared that Emilia, and everyone else around her, also had no clue why she did. It was said it was something to make convenient use of, but was it really like that? Connivere with Echidna, the blurriness of last night's deeds, and in the first place, his relationship with the girls, and now, the being Subaru least knew of as far as he was concerned was Natsuki Subaru. What kind of speculation did he face against the girls and guys? Was Natsuki Subaru even truly associated with them? TL note. More accurately, the girls, probably to refer to Emilia side, Subaru. Crap, my thoughts have come to a dead end. Let's go where Patrash is for a bit. For the time being, he wanted to go to a place where could settle down and think. When thinking that, the first thing that came to the current Subaru's mind as his greatest ally was most certainly that jet-black Earth Dragon. There was no choice but to put his faith in the one who had staked their life protecting him, regardless of whether he had his memories or not. Shola, that Earth Dragon tilde. That Earth Dragon isn't really my cup of tea since it keeps glaring at me. Subaru, you. Insults against Patrash are unforgivable. Even if this world became a world in which anyone's insults were permissible, I won't forgive any insults at Patrash. Shola, master, how whipped does that dragon have you? Shola raised her voice into something like a shriek, but Subaru took absolutely no notice of it. In any case, it was because he now wanted to be lost in his thoughts in peace by Patrash's side. At any rate, their original aim, the tower's capture, would begin straight after lunch. Since he had concealed his amnesia, there would be no way of stopping it. Subaru, that's why we're parting here as well. See you in a bit. Shola, you were colluding even for the reward, but even so, I care and bear it. I'm a woman for master's convenience, that's the meaning of my life. Subaru. As he tried to leave the room, Shola spoke this out and gave him a cold goodbye. Receiving her words, Subaru held his breath. While still keeping his back turned away from her, Subaru hung his head down and closed his eyes. Subaru, wherein Natsuki Subaru is the worth in going that far. Shola, master. Subaru, HK, damn it. Unable to bear the irritation welling up in him, Subaru roughly scratched his head and turned around so he was facing Shola, who was inclining her head. And then, walking towards the immobile girl, he stretched out both of his hands, and with all of his might, he embraced her slender body. Shola, HK, Subaru, you shouldn't think of yourself as just a woman for convenience or things like that. It was my bad. Subaru was going to end up becoming the same as Natsuki Subaru, were he to just make a one-sided use of her. Shola's breath hitched, and her body stiffened at the Subaru's comportment who had refused to become like that. Shola was tall, approximately the same height as Subaru, but even so her body which he had embraced was slender, supple and soft. There was quite the difference between her body and that of his own body. Shola, master, Subaru, you helped me out by being there. That is all. Shola. Around 30 seconds had passed, hugging Shola. Subaru slowly let go of her body. In all honesty, he felt awkward, but his sense of achievement was stronger. If he were to become a guy who just handed out gifts like that, if he were to become the same as Natsuki Subaru, Shola, master. Looking at the pensive Subaru, Shola dizzily walked towards him, her cheeks fiercely blushing. Her eyes were wet with tears, her breathing was somewhat feverish, and she was gazing at Subaru's lips. Shola, master, finally you've shown me some love. Subaru, beyond naive. Shola, gay. Pushing her face away with his palm, Subaru snapped Shola back to reality. Subaru, Whether or not I reward you, you get carried away. What a difficult character Subaru had somehow managed to calm down the aroused Shola and extracted himself out of the situation. He sighed. Eventually, Shola had left, still in a dreamy state of mind, with the words, "It's the mark of a good woman to see when it's time to leave as well. A secret makes a woman a woman." In all honesty, even though he had no clue what the meaning of this was, meddling into it would be all too bothersome. Subaru, since sometimes there are things that you need not know in the world. In any case, contrary to such a careless act, Subaru's situation was not looking great. At least, he expected what happened in the library to come to light if he pecked at Julius. But as now it had missed its mark, he had once again returned back to square one. Or, as he had first posited, were the others not at all involved in Subaru's missing memories? Oh, it was just Ram's facial expression that he hadn't been able to check Subaru. She looked like she was in tears, but I don't know any more if they were just crocodile tears. It had been Ram who had tried her hardest to not believe the story that Subaru had really lost his memories. Of course, there was still the possibility that she had been acting. It's not a possibility that she hadn't been able to recognize some sort of participation happening. But there are no limits to these sorts of suggestions. If he doesn't place his trust in something, then it's certainly a fact that he can't even start to doubt something. As far as Subaru is concerned, that basis was Subaru. That means Patrash now, after asserting that, he was shocked at himself for being the conclusion of a person who fell into a pitfall of bearing complete mistrust for everyone around him. But in fact, it was true that that side of him was quite prominent. His complete mistrust for everyone was indescribable, tantamount to it being deeply ingrained. And it wasn't just to others, but now he also couldn't believe in himself. Subaru. Still, it might be more a blessing if I got to spend some time in a paradise in which just Patrash and Earth dragons are. Ah, I heard Th Tilderat. Subaru. Wooer. At the very moment in which he had been voicing these thoughts out loud, a young girl nimbly rushed out from the corner of the Aisloy. The little girl was Meili, her blue braids swinging about as she stifled a giggle. Subaru wearily dropped his shoulders at the figure of the young girl when she had heard his dull thoughts voiced out. Subaru, it's just something like a joke or nonsense. Surely you didn't get that. Meili, I'm Sue Tildery. But I don't particularly intend to laugh at them, even if they're Oni-san's true feelings. Why Tilda know? Because if there's a place where you can just live with some bad animal chans, then I think it's something that one wouldn't mind living there. Subaru. How whilst hearing Subaru fumbling excuses, Meili held her skirt by the hem in a gesture which Subaru cannot tell whether it's meant to be elegant or wild. Even if he got an answer from that, he didn't really know what sort of reply to give. However, it didn't seem like she was pleased by that reply. Meili, C tilde NCEI gave a vague answer. Since a person took the trouble to diligently give a speech, I think that not listening to it properly is the mark of a naughty child. Subaru, that's not much of an apology. You're alone. You aren't with Beatrice. Meili, no chance. Why would I be with Beatrice, Jan? Bu tilde T, I think that is a question I'd rather ask of you, Oni-san. He had thought that the girls who were of a similar age would be hanging out together, yet it seemed that it was not so. Certainly, the times in which Beatrice had acted together with Emilia were many. That's why he treated his misgivings for the two of them as a set. He wasn't able to think of them separately. Subaru. Well, still, that's fine. Though just so you know, I don't have time to play with you. I'm sorry, but look elsewhere if you want to speak to someone. Shola's back there, for example. Meili, I could talk to my half-naked one-san. Bu tilde T right now I have stuff to do with Oni-san. Subaru, with me. Though Subaru didn't want to be disturbed during the time he had set to plunge into his unavoidable brooding in his secret date with Patrash, he couldn't help widen his eyes at Meili's unexpected introduction. Thinking about it, the little girl was quite similar to Shola, in that she was easy to talk to compared to Emilia and the others. Even in her last moments in the last loop, her corpse hadn't been left in a mutilated state as far as it being too painful to even look at. Since she had looked as if she had died in her sleep, the shocking images don't overlap with each other even when he's directly opposite her. His heartbeat had calmed as well. Subaru, what is it? Is it quick? Meili, yeah, it won't take particularly long. Subaru felt an overwhelming sense of security. He lent out an ear to listen to Meili's story. And then, Seeing Subaru adjust his posture to indicate he was willing to listen, Meili placed a finger to her lips and licked the fingertip with her tongue. This somewhat alluring gesture did not fit her childish appearance. Subaru frowned at it. Meili, I woe tilde ender, just how seriously should I take what we talked about last night? This is what the little girl said to Subaru while still smiling sweetly. Ah, Subaru, WH. Suddenly, Subaru was set free from the strange stoppage in his consciousness and grasped his own neck. There was something in his throat like a feeling of acridity and breathlessness. He launched into a coughing fit. Subaru, ack. Whilst touching his throat, Subaru coughed over and over again as he relished a sensation which felt similar to parched pain. And then he suddenly took notice. Subaru, ha-I. What was it that he was doing? Just before, he had for sure talked to Julius, then there had been that farce with Shola, and after that he had tried to go to where Patrash was. And finally, he had met Meili halfway there. Subaru. Our Subaru had been rubbing his arm as he was immersed in thought. He clucked his tongue in sharp pain, looking down at his hand, both of his hands. A bunch of scratch marks were carved on the wrists of both his left and right hand. He realized that blood was oozing out of them. Subaru, what the hell is this? The wounds were relatively deep, but the wounds themselves were irregular. Them being scratch marks was not a bad guess. They could not be from a sharp blade. They were wounds which had been caused by someone digging their nails deeply into his flesh with all of their might. Where on earth had he got these wounds from? Subaru? Ah. Subaru looked around his surroundings to see if there was anything he could use as a bandage whilst grimacing in pain, and he noticed that he was in a similar stone room like many of them on the 4th floor. And then he finally noticed it. White feet were strewn on the floor. The feet were unmoving, the strength in them had fizzled out. He slowly shifted his gaze up from their feet. There was a skirt and the upper part of their body, and then Subaru. Wah! And then, right there, the figure of a little girl who didn't even twitch had collapsed in front of him. Meili had collapsed in front of Subaru's eyes, and she wasn't breathing. Arc 6, Chapter 44, Medal of Blood. All rights belong to TAPPEI NAGATSUKI, the original author of Ray. Zero, starting a life in a different world from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop, you Archbishop, proofread by Furuta/u/Grace Tarperd Archbishop, you Archbishop 17 fan art created by Orisu PDF link plus disclaimers. View here, within the stone room, Subaru was gazing down at his hands in shock at seeing the small girl who lay limp just beneath his eyes. Subaru. He could not understand what had just happened. His wrists were wounded, his throat felt acrid, and his heart was racing. However, those things did not seem to be linked with his memory. He could only think of them as like glitches that had been born within the voids of his mind. Apart from the physical evidence that remained, any traces of anyone had vanished. Only one thing was certain. Only one thing, the light within the little girl's eyes that lay in front of him had been extinguished. Subaru. GH. It's still too early to give up. Subaru shook his head and rushed over towards the girl who was lying face up. His feet, with each step he took, were heavy, and his movements were sluggish, as if the soles of his shoes were glued to the floor. Somehow he managed to peel his shoes off the floor and stoop down beside the girl, Meili. Subaru. Meili lay there motionless, in spread-eagled fashion with her mouth half open. She had an expression that seemed like one of shock frozen on her face, and her lightless eyes seemed to be out of focus. The girl had always given off a hard-to-figure-out impression. However, her figure now only made that impression stronger. Subaru. Meili, oi Meili. He called out to her, but there was no reaction. Since his appeal had not roused her, Subaru shook her shoulders and tried to lightly slap her face in the hopes of seeing a response. But yet again, there was no response from her. Her eyelids, which had remained open, did not even blink. Subaru, me. Stopping himself, Subaru took a deep breath and decides that he will try to resuscitate her using what he recalls. Putting his hands on her chest, he remembered learning about how to administer emergency chest compressions. He remembered that the heart's position was about 2 fingers' length away from the top of the stomach and such. With this in mind, he started to push his palms down on her chest. Subaru. Meili. Hey, Meili. Subaru. Fuck. There was no reply. With a pale face, her body feebly shook. Cursing the situation he was in, Subaru brought her head up and secured her airway in preparation for giving her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The process of CPR included administering both chest compressions and performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Subaru, what next? There's something else. What is it? What is it? Fuck, 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 fuck. Desperately clawing at his memory, Subaru searches for anything else that he could do. However, he had obtained this smattering of knowledge from watching TV. In the end, it was only half complete. The more desperately he tried to resuscitate her, the more Subaru's arms succumbed to fatigue, and the more it started to feel like a fruitless attempt. Simply, in the end, he was repeating over and over again the actions of chest compressions, followed by mouth-to-mouth. He could not feel any trace of a heartbeat against his palms whilst he pressed down on her chest. He could not get any response from the girl's body, even when he was breathing air into her lungs. Continuing to administer CPR to the limit of his strength, damn it. Subaru fell back towards the ground, breathing in exhaustion and sweating profusely from his forehead. Fuck. Clutching his fringe in frustration, Subaru could only swear. Meili had not shown any signs of breathing. His first impression had been correct. The light within this little girl's eyes would never shine again. Meili had died. Ruthlessly, fate had snatched away this young girl's life so cruelly. Such an expression was mere consolation and was not suitable in this place. It hadn't been fate that had killed her. She had been murdered by someone. Meili's neck was blemished by a series of bluish-black bruises, serving as proof. Subaru. Catching his breath and filled with regret, Subaru looks towards his hands. Until now, both of those hands had been used in an attempt to save Meili's life. On his wrists, both his left wrist and his right wrist, there were numerous amounts of scratches grooved into them as if done by fingernails, quite entirely as if someone had scratched and clawed at them with all their might, as if it was a life-and-death situation. He wasn't so ignorant to not understand what it meant. Subaru. Subaru gets up and goes to fix Meili's disheveled appearance. He adjusts her clothing, crosses her arms across her chest, and closes her eyelids. And whilst he was paying his respects to her corpse, he gently placed his hand against her thin neck. Sensing a bad feeling about this, he traces his fingers against the bluish-black hues left on Meili's neck. Subaru, a perfect match. His parched muttering came without any strength or surprise, and it only reaffirmed this fact. The bruises left on Meili's neck looked like they had been caused by fingers, and the shapes of those fingers matched exactly with Subaru's fingers to the untrained eye. No longer would he doubt the facts here. Meili had been strangled to death, and the culprit was no other than Subaru. As soon as he had realized this fact, the feeling of wanting to vomit ran up his throat. He turned his face quickly and rolled to the side so he could avoid befouling Meili's body. It had only been a short while in which Subaru's breakfast had been in his stomach, and that was what came out. Emptying his stomach's contents onto the floor, he vomited until his stomach is completely empty. Subaru, I'm really done puking. Wiping his mouth with his sleeve, he mocks himself. In fact, he couldn't remember how many times he had vomited now. This may have been the first time today, but the day last time had been a terrible amount of times. He felt that as of now, he wouldn't be able to stomach any food anymore. Subaru felt like apologizing with all his heart to all the farmers around the country. His mind would likely crack and break into little pieces if he wasn't conscious of thinking such absurd thoughts. Subaru. The circumstantial evidence present matched too well. There had been two people in the room, and the bruises on Meili's neck matched Subaru's fingers. Subaru isn't optimistic enough to believe that he could escape the blame in this situation. He didn't even think someone had framed him. You don't need to add another person's hands to create this situation. If someone had framed him here, then this place transcended all known dimensions. If hands are needed to create this nightmare, then it is only two you need. Since Natsuki Subaru possesses two arms, then surely that is enough. Subaru. I don't understand the meaning of this. Having accepted this reality head-on, Subaru put his lack of understanding into words. Inexplicable, baffling, incomplete, regardless of the term used to describe this scene, it would be impossible to reproduce it. He can only conclude that the crime was done by Natsuki Subaru. However, Subaru did not hold such a memory within himself. Subaru. What happened? What happened? Remember. Remember, remember, remember. He stood up and walked around the room, trying to wrench open his memories. He had died, then woke up and seen Emilia, Beatrice, and Patrash. He had hid that he had lost his memories from them and then eaten breakfast. He had tried to interrogate Julius whilst Shola secretly kept an eye on them before then hugging her. Then he came across Maylie in the corridor. Finally, Maylie said she had some business with him and wanted to talk to him about something, Subaru. Last night. She mentioned last night. Subaru frowns as he vaguely recalls Maylie's words. However, shortly after she had tried to talk about it, Subaru had slipped out of consciousness. The words she had said had shattered into 1,000 pieces, just like the thoughts that you can get whilst you are on the verge of falling asleep. Subaru, night. I was asked about the night. On that I am sure. Before I woke up or before I went to bed. Either way, she asked me about one or the other, and then, from there, he doesn't know anymore. The only thing he can fathom about the contents of what Maylie had asked Subaru was that it was related to his evening excursion. One, something he too wanted to know about. Emilia and such had told him that this morning Subaru had been found collapsed in the library. Subaru's behavior in the night before he had collapsed was completely unknown to him. At least now, there was no doubt that the incident was related to his memory loss. And surely, Maylie remembered what Subaru had forgotten. There happened to be some connection, on that there was no mistake. Subaru, she's dead. And I strangled her. Why did I do such a thing? If he looked down at both of his hands, although not present in his memories, he felt that it revived a raw sensation in his palms. Both arms had squeezed her neck until her breath had stopped. There was evidence on his wrists that showed that Maylie had desperately tried to resist. If he looked carefully, on Maylie's fingernails there was blood left in them, and the evidence of a fight. Very deep fingernail marks had been left there on his arms. He couldn't help but feel like this had been the echo of deep-seated resentment that the little girl had left behind. Subaru. Ah, Subaru's thinking, which had been gripped by the reins of delusion. Suddenly he let out a hoarse gasp. He had gasped as if he'd been taken aback by something. The cause was due to his arm. It was not the wounds at the vicinity of his wrist which he was staring at. He was looking at his right hand's fingernails. Just like Maylie, his fingernails were jam-packed with blood and skin as if he had scratched someone. Subaru. With these baffling bloodstains in mind, Subaru turned to face Maylie's corpse again. Showing respect to her death, he had fixed up her disheveled appearance. It wasn't a great consolation, but except for her bluish-black bruises on her neck, the little girl's corpse still looked cute, just as she did when she was alive. At least there were no traces of any fingernail scars visible on her body. Subaru's fingernails were unkempt and hideous, and there were no traces of such pitiful gouge marks on her body. Then the remains of skin and blood left stuffed inside his nails. What were these vestiges of harmful intent? Subaru. No way. He looked down at the arm that had been hurting him. Subaru's lips quiver as he gets a bad feeling about it. Fresh in his mind was the fact that from the elbow of his right arm there was a grotesque black coloration to it. But it had been his left arm that was throbbing in pain. Subaru starts to slowly roll up his sleeve, unrolling all the way up to the inside of his elbow, where the source of the pain was coming from. He feels the fabric trying to stick to his arm as dried blood peels off as he continues to unroll his sleeve. Taking a sharp breath, Subaru finishes unrolling his sleeves all the way to his shoulder. There he saw his own left arm bleeding quite a bit. Subaru let out the breath he'd taken. Subaru. He scrapes away the dark red blood that was dirtying his arm with his fingers and gazed at the wound that had been bringing him this pain. As he had imagined, there were scratches in his skin as if it had been carved by his own right hand. From the inside of his elbow all the way to his upper arm, there was a wound which had been painfully carved into it. However, it was not merely just an ordinary wound. There are characters. Carved there on his flesh by fingernails are some crudely etched characters. Engraved there, it said, Natsuki Subaru was here. To Subaru. Ah, it was as if his breath had been knocked out of him. Subaru wiped the scar left on his left arm with his fingers to see if he had been mistaken, over and over again. Once the flow of blood had stopped, he rubbed the wound once more and confirmed it. There was no other way of reading it. No matter how he looked at it, it was written as Natsuki Subaru was here. The handwriting was messy, written in Japanese, and said, Natsuki Subaru was here. It was easy to understand. It was a very easy to understand self-assertion. It was like when the criminal left evidence at the scene of the crime as proof of his own crime. Leaving behind the name had clearly conveyed who had committed this crime. How kind of him! What ambition! Oh, how must he have craved being in the limelight, Subaru. You, what is it with you? In the face of such unacceptable facts, Subaru's voice shook as he shouted out in grief. Shaking his left arm and keeping it far away from him whilst turning his face away from it, his feet ended up getting tangled. He fell flat on his backside. Subaru's left arm hit the floor and his teeth clattered together. Many, many times he banged his arm on the floor over and over again. He bit his lip as the pain in his bone resounded. Blood starts to pool out of his mouth. But even so, the reality of the situation will not change. The wounds on his arms will not disappear. Subaru, this wasn't there. There was no such wound here. Shaking his head in refusal, Subaru cries out this appeal that his wound was something after he lost consciousness, in the room where there only the motionless Meili lay. The wound on his left arm had been newly created. He had never noticed it before. Someone had strangled Meili and had scratched him as well. No, it wasn't that. No, no, that was absolutely wrong. It's all wrong. Admit it. Understand it. He ought to know. It wasn't someone else. It wasn't performed by another being. This crime had been committed by Natsuki Subaru. It wasn't Subaru. It was Natsuki Subaru who killed Meili and carved this medal in his arm to show off his achievement. Subaru, CRAZ. Insane. Crazy. It seems he is going insane. Is Natsuki Subaru the name of a monster that he just couldn't comprehend? Subaru. This was not the first time Subaru had held great distrust of Natsuki Subaru. Natsuki Subaru obviously repeats actions that make no sense, starting with his unusual behavior of the night before, which still hadn't been answered. When he had ended up questioning Julius, he had heard from him of Echidna's misdeeds with him, and how those actions had driven Julius into some sort of mental anguish. The Subaru that came back from the convenience store and the Natsuki Subaru here no longer resembled the same person, as if it was a counterfeit version of him. 3 Subaru was seriously convinced that his body possessed a completely different being inside it. Subaru. But that's not right. Although it annoys him to, if he pays close attention to the scar engraved on his left arm, he can't deny his suspicion. His name was engraved on his arm. Of course, it was quite different from how he'd write it using a pen or a brush. However, there was a certain peculiarity within how the letters were written. Specifically, there was a certain habit that Subaru had when writing his calligraphy. Unless you were to deliberately copy them, it would be practically impossible for someone else to have coincidentally written it like this. In other words, it was unmistakable that Subaru's handwriting and Natsuki Subaru's handwriting had the same origin. As soon as he had noticed that, the facts had become clear. That is Subaru. When I lost my consciousness, was Natsuki Subaru returning? And then that Natsuki Subaru had had some form of argument with Meili and ended up killing her. He had then left that fact behind in his arm and then hidden back in the confines of his consciousness. Just that, he truly did not understand. Subaru, why are you using my body when you have your own? Why mine? No, what on earth am I? What are you planning to do? Who the hell are you? Clutching his face, Subaru's voice trembles as he mutters this. In this different world in which he has no allies, in this different world in which he doesn't know who the enemy is, in this different world where he can't tell between friend and foe. In the end, Subaru had removed even himself from the frame of innocence. Subaru. He was staggering around, barely able to keep upright as the feeling of anxiety overwhelms his heart. Subaru tries to take long, deep breaths to ward off this overpowering feeling. He can't remain calm. His mind was in complete disarray, but as it was currently, he didn't want to be brandished about by whatever intentions Natsuki Subaru had without knowing about them. So, Subaru, who are you? Whilst muttering words of hatred at the impossibility which was reflected in his arm, Subaru placed his left index fingernail against his right arm. He placed it right against the grotesque-looking skin and started to scratch that into his arm. Red blood droplets were oozing from his black skin. He thought that it was ironic that the blood that flowed from his black skin was red. 1. More like behavior of the evening, but evening excursion sounds snappier. 2. Fun fact, this was carved into the flugel tree in the anime. Flugel was here, there, and they were also the words he wrote on the paper when he was studying at the mansion. Refer to this image. 3. The gist seems to be okay, but I feel like this part's translation could be improved here. Arc 6, Chapter 45. Embrace of the Guilty. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray. Zero, starting a life in a different world from zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Furuta /u/Grace Turperd Archbishop, you Archbishop Paper Lightning proofread by Bade /u/Bade Review /u/Reviewer 524 Yerek /u/Yerek fan art created by Art Source. A painful red drop of blood drips down his right arm with the black spots pattern. Call it fortune or whatever you want, but his wound had stopped bleeding faster than expected, but still, if he applies force to it, his wound will open again. But he didn't care about that too much. Dig your nails in and you'll feel pain. Do it hard and you'll tear the skin and blood will flow. Even though it felt like the blood from that wound had stopped quickly, it really didn't feel that different. Subaru, without paying much attention to the fresh, self-inflicted wound on his right arm, he proceeds to wipe the blood from his palm and then pulls down his sleeve to conceal the hideous message carved on his left arm. Subaru, in any case, I need to hurry. Already he had wasted quite a lot of time in this room. Meili's corpse was still lying in the middle of the room, but at least there no longer was any trace of what he had done to her. If he could, he would have liked to avoid defiling her corpse even more, but there is still one last thing he must do. Subaru. Using both of his arms, Subaru drags the girl's light body to a corner of the room. There, he finds what could be called a table made of stone, or maybe it might have been beddings. For now, he gently hid Meili's dead body behind where the huge square stone slab was placed. Sorry, though apologizing to Meili from the bottom of his heart, Subaru concealed her fate. After all, how would he explain that it wasn't him to everyone, and that the culprit is Natsuki Subaru, and even if he could, who would believe such a thing? Subaru, I can't defend myself, or do anything, even if I wasn't the one who killed Meili. The murder was carried out with my own hands. He's not aware about how criminal investigations are handled in this world. But if someone were to see Meili's nails and the wounds on Subaru's wrists, no one would doubt that he was guilty, and trying to appeal would be futile. If it ever comes to that, the only thing he can do is try to avoid the trial. No, he already covered up the crime. He was aware that the course of actions he took isn't the right one. However, he had no other option. He no longer knew who he could trust, who could he doubt. However, if there is a single thing that he is convinced of, it's Subaru. Next time we meet, Meili, you will be the only one I won't suspect. Crushed, then strangled. This is the second time Subaru finds Meili already dead. Aside from a few others, she was the least suspicious. But it doesn't matter anymore. Subaru won't be able to get any kind of information from her. The closed circle mystery, in other words. It is known that the criminal is one of the people present, and the crime could not have been committed by some outsider. What a cliché. However, as a detective, Natsuki Subaru is equipped with an illegal power, return by death, which causes time to be rewound whenever he is killed. Anyone, no matter how useless, could become a renowned detective capable of dealing with any tragedy with this power. Subaru, though the detective being the culprit, is also something predictable of these mystery tropes. It's regrettable, no matter how great return by death might be. Probably Natsuki Subaru is just waiting to make his next move, even if the situation gets redone many times. Stopping him may prove a very difficult task. The detective having a different personality in which he is a criminal is a pretty tired mystery trope. But you would think that in real life, if the detective just threw himself off a cliff, the problem would be solved right. Return by death and the detective himself is the culprit. When both of these met, the situation became unsolvable. A so-called, inescapable helix maze. This isn't the time to be talking. In any case, right now I gotta buy time. It's not a problem that will be solved with time. There's definitely something that brings back time. Believing in that, Subaru wished to be freed from this dead end, and then stood up. Leaving those circumstances aside, he caressed Meili's forehead just one last time. Surely she wouldn't want him to touch her anymore. Her forehead felt cold to the touch, as if she was rejecting Subaru. Ah. And after despairingly concealing Meili's murder, Subaru leaves the room. Then, looking at the right and left of the aisle as he left the site slowly, "Ah, Subaru, thank God, so you were here." Subaru, TCH, it was Emilia's sudden voice that made Subaru's shoulder shiver as he turned back to look at her. She was just taking a stroll, and she tilts her head to Subaru, whose cheeks had turned rigid. "Emilia, sorry, did I scare you?" "Subaru, I was surprised, that's, we tilde LL, that's, you know. It's just because it was so sudden." "What happened, Emilia-chan?" "Emilia, I was just walking around the tower to see whether I could do something. Rather than that, Subaru." "Subaru, yeah, Emilia. Just now, were you playing around again?" Subaru inhales sharply at hearing Emilia's mysterious question. Her amethyst eyes were staring right at Subaru, but Subaru didn't know the meaning of her question. It was true that his voice was shaking, but what he said was supposed to be an incomplete answer that would still suffice. Well, rather than Emilia's gleeful eyes, Subaru tasted a sense of uncomfortableness and gulped down his bitter spit. In the room behind them lies Meili's dead body, cold and lifeless. Although he made sure to keep it out of plain sight, were someone to search through the room, her body would be discovered within minutes. So, leaving this place was his top priority. "Subaru, sorry, I need to go the washroom for a second." "Emilia, ah, sure." Hurriedly leaving the room, Subaru left words that could easily be misunderstood. He must get away from Emilia as soon as possible and kill time as much as he can. From there, he could take care of the wound on his right arm. "Subaru, Emilia-chan. I am going to the washroom. Why are you coming with me, Emilia? I mean, we all will get together for lunch anyway, so don't you think it would be nice if we're together for a while? Don't worry, I'll be outside the door." "Subaru, not worried about you hearing the sound of peeing, but..." Emilia stands in front of Subaru, who wanted to part ways with her, and looks at his face. Speaking of justice is just an argument, and the side which deserves justice always goes through pain. In this case, it was no exception. Subaru had said all that without even once thinking of justice. However, concerning that other side which had been struggling, Subaru carefully hazards a guess towards Emilia's feelings. For what purpose does Emilia want to accompany Subaru? Still, Emilia looked completely plain to Subaru, who was looking at her from the corner of his eyes. She doesn't look like she has any plan in mind, but in fact, she is one of the enemies he suspects. Subaru did not see Emilia's and Beatrice's dead bodies the last time when everyone had been killed. Although it was true that Natsuki Subaru's intentions were unknown from the wounds on his arms, no matter how much chaos Natsuki Subaru could cause, it was not possible to produce such a situation alone. Killing Shola, Echidna, Ram, Julius, and Meili, and eventually tearing down the tower with the power of shadows, and finally beheading him, that someone. There still existed someone in this tower who Subaru was not aware of. "Emilia, Subaru, are you okay? Actually, you still aren't back to normal, are you?" "Subaru, TCH, I'm fine. I just got lost in my thoughts for a bit." "Emilia, really, but you don't look too well." Suddenly, Emilia reaches out for Subaru. He couldn't give up so quickly, but Emilia makes his cheeks redden in embarrassment, and Subaru senses a ticklish feeling in his eyebrows. "Subaru, you're looking quite closely now, aren't you?" "Emilia, MHM, that's right, I am looking closely. It feels like lately I've been following you around with my eyes a lot. I don't know why, but it's strange." "Subaru, I guess so. It's really strange, isn't it?" He was carefully keeping an eye on any sudden movements from Emilia. The smiling Emilia's hand was touching Subaru's face. The situation would drastically change if Emilia's hand were to slit Subaru's throat in the blink of an eye. No guarantees she wouldn't. Or otherwise, she didn't even need to do that. With the strength of Emilia's arm, it would be easily possible for her to break Subaru's neckbones. However, her hands did not feel malicious or hostile, and Subaru is at loss on what to think. After all, Subaru. He was only a Japanese student who had come from a convenience store, so it was only natural that Subaru would not find these feelings reliable. Things like people's hostility or malice. He had almost no experience with these things. Subaru's familiarity with the atmosphere, of making people awkward even from big distances, and silence of apathetic indifference that could not even be called cold disdain. Neither of these can hurt the loner Natsuki Subaru. Henceforth, He does not know the feeling he was getting from the girl's amethyst eyes in front of him was genuine or fake. But if he doesn't know, he wonders what kind of face she would make if he were to confess everything. How great would it feel if he were to screw up that beautiful face she had that made it seem like she grew up only ever seeing splendid things, as if there was nothing to worry about in the world. The Natsuki Subaru you are worried about is nowhere to be found. No, that's not it. If he were to say that he is a cruel, crazed murderer, one Emilia, come to think of it, Meili, you know Subaru. HK a strangled noise emerged from his throat as his eyes opened wide. Why was Meili's name mentioned here? He couldn't in the slightest hide his exclamation of surprise. It had been a complete surprise attack. If it was Emilia's aim to gauge Subaru's reaction, he had fallen hook, line, and sinker for it. However, Emilia had her eyes off of Subaru. Her gaze had dropped down towards the floor. She wasn't looking towards the aceway where he had come from. More so, it felt as if she was just looking around the whole tower. And following from that, Emilia showed a slight hint of hesitation and said, Emilia, I wonder if I was too short-tempered with her. When we return back safe and sound from this tower, we can see what we can do about Meili. Emilia, of course what she did a year ago was terrible, and I understand Otto-kun's point that we shouldn't believe her so easily, but was thanks to Meili that we were able to cross the sand dunes, and if she had been plotting something against us, I think she would have done it before we reached this tower. Pinching the cuffs of her clothes, Emilia carefully states her thoughts, although it feels as if he should take her story with a grain of salt. Amongst the people in this tower, Meili's position was special. She had apparently originally been an assassin hired to take Emilia and Beatrice's lives. She had failed her duty, leading to her being their captive. However, she had made full use of her special ability, which she had been born with, accompanying them on their current journey, thus contributing to the objectives of her former targets. Subaru, pardon, I guess. Emilia. Even if I were to let her free, I think everyone would oppose it. But maybe we can find some other place to put her in outside of her gloomy prison cell, right? Emilia, of course, will talk to Meili herself and see if she wants it. It would be hard if I got ahead of myself and ended up being hated by her. Hurriedly shaking her hand, Emilia insisted that it had just been one of her opinions. Perhaps she had put enough thought to hold and convey this story out to its fullness. At every turn, there's a glimpse of the argument being rebutted. Were these Emilia's true intentions? Would it be okay to believe her? At least until now, there hadn't been a single time which Emilia had been hostile towards Subaru. No, if he were to say it, no one had shown any hostility towards Subaru. Beatrice, Echidna, Ram, Julius, Meili, none of them had shown any hostility towards Subaru. The only certain things were that a criminal had killed Subaru by pushing him from the top of the staircase, and that a criminal had slaughtered everyone in the tower, and a criminal had lopped off his head, and that Natsuki Subaru had killed Meili. Only these evil acts should be held in contempt. Then could he trust Emilia? Could he believe in her purity, which was like that of fresh snow that did not know of impurity? Emilia had put so much enthusiasm in her speech whilst he had been fretting about Meili, which his hand had killed. Still he wonders if she would believe him. Subaru, so stupid. Emilia, Subaru, I said such bullshit. I should have known. Short-tempered, indeed. In these situations, can we really be talking about future prospects? It feels like a stalemate in all directions. He has no room to worry about anyone else. And that especially applies to hearing the future plans of the girl who had already died. Even if he closes his eyes, pretending not to know about her death, would it really comfort him? Cursing, Subaru bit his lips right after he had uttered those words. He had said such stupid things. He couldn't help having said things, such as all the remarks of suspicion that he had thrust upon Emilia due to the emotions of this place. There was no justification for his actions. He had just been venting his anger, just like a child's tantrum. That Emilia, Subaru. Subaru. Boo, Emilia, what happened to you so suddenly? Even if you're in a bad mood, it's no good to speak like that. Astonished and shocked, he hangs his head down as his emotions gnaw at him and tears start to pour out of him as he sobs. Emilia, however, having anticipated such a reaction, vigorously clasped Subaru's cheeks with both hands and looked straight into his black eyes. Subaru, our Emilia, if you are going to be sulky and emotional like this, speak up, either to me or Beatrice. If Subaru is in trouble, I will be in trouble together with him. But don't carry it all by yourself. Quit moping around by yourself. Stop trying to be alone. That's something similar to what Roswell would do in bad times. Don't copy him. Giving it her all, Emilia turns towards Subaru and continues to speak. And just after that, she took her hands away from Subaru's face, who had been really taken aback, and suddenly pulled his head over to her chest. She held Subaru's head against her chest in an embrace and started to gently stroke him. Emilia, do you understand? In my heart, I am not mad at you at all. I won't be disillusioned with whatever it is. So you can tell me. He was pressed against the feeling of soft, warm skin. Beyond that feeling of warmth, the rhythm of life was steadily ticking away in her. It was quite gentle, rather like a lullaby which a baby would listen to. Subaru let out a strangled sob. In that moment, Subaru's heart had lurched with a feeling of intense shame. Having done all these things until now, having said such terrible things, still she was gentle towards him. He had doubted her. He had blindly hated this poor girl. What had been the point of it all? Do they really exist? The one who had been planning to kill Subaru. Had plunging to his death really been a simple accident? It had not been something somebody did on purpose. Maybe someone had inadvertently tripped and pushed him. There was no evil person inside this tower. The only one who had a heart that was foul, ugly, and dangerous was Natsuki Subaru, and Natsuki Subaru. Properly speaking, wasn't he just an insolent outsider to this world that should have never been? Subaru, Emilia, I am. Emilia. Subaru, I am. He doesn't know how to tell her. He had thought that he would be able to confess everything to her, losing his memories, what had happened to Meili, returning back in time every time he died. Everything, he says, may not be believable. But she may believe some of it. If she believes him, a way to break out of this deadlock may be found. If just that is found, Subaru will. Emilia-sama Barusu, that was the moment when he had tried to somehow squeeze his thoughts out of his shivering head. A sharp, imminent voice comes from the side, as if filling over Subaru's anguish. Subaru could not see the owner of the voice at that moment due to Emilia's embrace. Then he heard Emilia, who confirmed that person's identity by murmuring Ram. Emilia, what's wrong? I'm talking to Subaru about something which is V tilde Rai important. Ram, that is, something Ram understands just by looking at it. But kindly stop it. This is an urgent matter. Emilia, okay. The sound of footsteps drew closer, and as soon as they did, Emilia nervously let go of Subaru. Subaru aggressively wiped away at this face with his sleeve, getting rid of the distant feeling of warmth and the zeal in the corner of his eyes. After that, both he and Emilia turned to face Ram. Whether it was the thing she saw which was bad, or whether her timing was the worst, he wanted to strike Ram with such feelings that were coming up in his mind. Even though he just reflected on it, he felt sorry for himself for not being able to stand straight again immediately. However, Ram's appearance said that she could not afford to do things like teasing them for them embracing one another, or thinking about Subaru, who was having mixed emotions after seeing them. Emilia, Ram, what's wrong, Ram? It is an urgent matter. Please come to the third-floor library immediately. Beatrice Sama found something terrible. Emilia. Beatrice did to the surprised Emilia. Ram briefly nodded as yes. Then, as she turned away from Subaru and Emilia, Ram, Anastasia Sama. No, was it Echidna? Anyway, Ram will go search for her and Julius. Barusu, you go with Emilia Sama Subaru. Why, yeah, got it. Subaru nodded his head whilst being unable to form a reply. Without even waiting for an answer, Ram kicks the door and runs away from the two. Surprised from the situation, Subaru turns to Emilia. Subaru, Ram said that. Emilia, let's hurry. Ram sounded really serious. Something terrible must have happened. Emilia, Subaru, I won't forget about what we talked earlier. Subaru, yeah. Subaru weakly nodded and listens to Emilia, who was the only one thinking about that. Already, from his guilt towards Meili to his sense of urgency regarding the situation, all of Subaru's thought process had been torn down. With that, Subaru took off with Emilia, heading for the third layer Tegeta at a brisk pace. Welcoming them after running up the long staircase was the Library of the Dead, which boasted a huge collection of books. Beatrice, so you've come, I suppose. Beatrice, who was standing in front of the stairs behind the bookshelves which had the countless books of the dead fitted in them, welcomed Subaru. The girl, with her short arms and a peculiar pattern in her eyes, breathed out a tired sigh with a frown. Emilia, Beatrice, Ram told us to come. You have found something terrible, is what she said. Beatrice, certainly, it cannot, he said, that it's good news. Rather, it is something bad, I suppose. Saying that, Beatrice swings roundly around to Amelia's question. Then she turns her blue eyes towards Subaru. Beatrice. Betty had been looking into the Taygeta library since this morning. While Subaru was out cold, Betty was trying to analyze this room, though its mechanisms are nothing like the forbidden libraries, I suppose. Subaru. Well, regardless of the introduction. What happened? Please tell. Subaru, who ran up the stairs and was lightly panting, urges her to get to the point. Hearing those words, Beatrice shut her eyes for a moment, and she slowly pointed towards one of the bookshelves which was diagonally behind her, the third row from the top, the book on the far right. The rightmost of Chinese letter THE, third row. In accordance with what Beatrice pointed out, Subaru and Emilia came to the bookshelf after she had spat out those words. The bookshelf was packed with books, and Subaru could not read the characters which were written in a foreign language on the black covers. As usual, he could only think of them as hieroglyphs. So even the title of the book which Beatrice pointed out to Subaru and the others was not known to him. At least, as all books were in this library, it was certain that it was a book of the dead. Emilia. No way. Emilia, who had been standing right next to him, spilled these words out. Looking at that, Subaru's cheeks stiffened at hearing her stunned reaction. Such astonishment had delayed the sadness which was to come straight after. Just what was it that had punched her heart with such force? Shivering, her lips tremble right next to Subaru, clearly in shock. And Emilia said, Emilia, MEILI Japanese symbol PORTROUTE. Oh, one, he here uses Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, which is a distant way of referring to something. This guy would have been the usual way of translating, but since he's sort of speaking about his old self, I opted for a simple he instead. Arc 6, Chapter 46, Meili Portrout. Translated by Paper Lightning Archbishop, you Archbishop Archbishop, you Archbishop Furuta, /u/ Grace Tupperd, proofread by Shifty, /u/ Shiftyfish 87 review, /u/ reviewer 524 tournament, tournament 1122 fan art created by Art Source. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray. Zero starting a life in a different world from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English Japanese web novel source. Meili Portrout staring at the binding of the book. As Emilia said that, Subaru became shocked. His eyes shot open. He glared at the binding of the book. The letters written there, Subaru couldn't read them at all. However, here now, there is no reason for Subaru to put on a pretext and think that Emilia was shaking without meaning. Then why was there a Book of the Dead with Meili's name in the title? There was no room to doubt this fact. Subaru. He still couldn't talk. Subaru, with stiff cheeks, had his back break out in a cold sweat. Inside his skull, his brain was desperately screaming one thing, and one thing only. Why? Why is there a book with Meili's name here? Why did this library that kept records of the dead have the girl's book ready that quickly? Why is it that, in a library this vast, that they found Meili's book so easily? Why was it that the moment Subaru felt like he could trust Emilia out of everyone in the tower, this had to happen? Why was it that fate just couldn't forgive Natsuki Subaru? Why, wee 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 wee, he wee wee wee, wee 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 wee, he wee 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 wee, he wee 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 wee. Emilia, Beatrice, did you check the contents of the book? Subaru, HK, while forcing himself to bury the incredible amount of whys in his head, those words rung awfully clearly inside of his eardrums. Raising his face in a snap, Emilia was the one who probed Beatrice. She asked Beatrice whilst continuing to lay against the bookshelf, glaring at the book in question. As far as Subaru had heard about the books of the dead found in this library, if you are acquainted with the person in the book and touch it, then the memories of their life will pour into their head. Though it's a magical book with unwavering powers, it is not the fantasy tone part of the story that becomes a problem in this place. It's a more realistic problem. Looking at the records of Meili's life means that they will supposedly see the records of her last moments. In other words, all that they will see who it was that strangled her. Subaru. Subaru had killed Meili with his own two hands in these circumstances. He does not doubt that it was Natsuki Subaru that had carried it out. But it's only Subaru who can come to that distinction. The memories act sort of like video footage. such as the ones you could get from crime prevention cameras around potential crime scenes. He won't be able to expect them to follow such a distinction. In addition, Subaru in this loop had concealed his memory loss from Emilia and the others. Subaru's crime would become clear to them from the memories, and it very much would reach the stage where it would reveal his memory loss. If the others had acted ad hoc already, then it would only sound like a bad excuse. Naturally, Emilia and the others seemed to be on the same level as Subaru. But if Beatrice had anticipated this and had already referred to the memory about Maylee's death, Beatrice, I haven't checked yet, I suppose. Subaru, HK, oh, is that so? Beatrice, it's natural that I didn't, in fact. I have no choice but to handle it carefully, I suppose. In fact, to begin with, we don't even know whether this Maylee's book is about the one we know. If it really is that girl's book, Emilia, Maylee, inside this tower, oh no, we have to look for her right away. Her complexion changing, Emilia tries to break off into a run at hearing Beatrice's words. However, Beatrice cuts in front of Emilia and shakes her head. Beatrice, wait, I suppose. If it really is that girl's book, then searching for her all in a hurry is meaningless, in fact. You know what happens when a book is added here, I suppose. Emilia. So because of that, Ram went searching for us and Julius group. Beatrice, if in the middle of this, Maylee waltzes in looking all innocent, then you can take this as being Betty's childish misunderstanding. Emilia's strength steadily drains out of her as she listens to Beatrice calmly pointing these facts out. Still, with a fretful look across her pale face, Emilia clasps her hands against her chest, as if she was praying. She hopes that the book that had come from the bookshelf was not Maylee's one. She clings onto the hope that it belongs to someone who had happened to have the same name as her. But Natsuki Subaru knows that hope will never come true. Subaru was frantically turning his head back and forth between Emilia and Beatrice as they spoke. His thoughts were spinning around in circles. For the most part, he was thinking on how to get out of this situation and whether to keep the truth only to himself. As he had simulated before, he can't let Emilia and the others see Maylee's memories. It was a stroke of good luck that Beatrice hadn't seen them. Even so, it was only a matter of time until one of them would. It's a fact that Maylee is dead. She will never appear in this library again looking all innocent. So, of course, they will eventually get a chance to check the Book of the Dead. Before long, they would do it. If they look at the book, everyone will accuse Subaru. Then, should he do something like disposing of Maylee's book? No, he wants to avoid that. It's true that this situation was exceedingly difficult. However, Subaru's feelings had become more problematic. Subaru also has a great interest in the contents of the book. Subaru currently believes with certainty that it was Natsuki Subaru who had killed Maylee. If he were to look through Maylee's records, he may be able to see Natsuki Subaru there. He could conceivably look at the literal form of the potential enemy that was lying inside him. If that was possible, Subaru's situation would change drastically. At least, he should be able to come up with a resolution. Hence, he cannot let Emilia or anyone else read the contents of the book. Subaru must be the only one to experience the book's contents. Shola. Now this is what you call a commotion. Did something happen? Emilia. Ah, Shola, you've come. In the meanwhile, Shola had showed up at the Tegeta library. Craning her neck, her black hair swinging about, Shola greets Emilia and Beatrice. She then notices Subaru at the back of the library and waves her hand at him. In this moment, he thinks that her appearance overlaps with how Maylee had entered the breakfast room this morning. Subaru turns his face away and resists the urge to vomit. Shola. Oh, what a cold response from Master, after spending such a passionate time together with me. Beatrice, I am quite interested in what happened between you and Subaru, but for now I will postpone it, I suppose. Speak up if you've seen Maylee anywhere. You were good friends with her, I suppose. Shola, the Chibiko, number 2, won her. Now that you mention it, I haven't seen her for a while. I don't know what happened to her after this morning's breakfast. Shola answered Beatrice by shaking both of her hands. Then she placed her waving hands against her cheeks, and cocking her head she said, "What's wrong with number 2? At hearing Shola's question, Emilia cast her gaze down in unease. Emilia, to tell you the truth, we found a book with Maylee's name in the library. We haven't looked inside it yet. Before doing that, we wanted to check whether that child was okay. Shola. Ah, I see. Number 2 ended up dying. That's troublesome to think about. There are many ways you can die. Things like that may just happen new. Emilia, HK Beatrice. You're looking quite indifferent to what was going on around her. Shola states her opinion on the matters of life and death, paying zero consideration towards the distressed Emilia. Hearing what Shola had said, Emilia's cheeks stiffened, and Beatrice glared at Shola with an expression of anger. However, Shola did not pay any attention to how the two had reacted. Shola, so where is this important buok? Once you look inside, you may find out how, and where number 2 died indeed. Subaru, that's enough from you. Always talking like this. Subaru was unable to look on without doing anything. He flares up at Shola's reckless remarks. Now Shola's behavior showed heartlessness too. Up until now, by no means could Subaru tell Emilia his thoughts. He has just about enough discretion to not open his mouth. As for Shola, she is no Shola. Don't get mad, master. I didn't mean any offense. But practically the book is here, so shouldn't we do that? Subaru. Least after we all get together. Shola, even if you don't do it leisurely, is it not worth a shot to read the book? If it's about number 1's worries of not knowing what'll happen after reading it, then Subaru falters. The strength of his rebuttal weakens as Shola presses for an answer from him. She cuts off her speech and quietly sends Beatrice a sidelong glance, and then once again she cast her gaze at Subaru. Her face continued to have an unreserved, but not malicious look on it. Shola, Master should read the book. Subaru, Shola. When you first saw this library, it was Master and that other pretty boy too who first experienced what was in it. No. Afterwards, there were no negative effects who coming out re-eyed. Her ample-sized breasts shaking, Shola takes a step forward and brings her face right next to his. His breath was taken away by the woman's suggestion, and Subaru's brain started to once again think carefully. Shola's suggestion is extremely reasonable for a woman that has such an attitude. Naturally, it's not known to him what sort of effect the books of the dead have on people once you read it. At least, there had been 2 people who had already experienced it. There should be enough value in trying to read it. Of course, it was entirely possible that this experience of Subaru's had snatched away his memories, triggering the separation between Natsuki Subaru and his current self. If that really was the case here, it would be odd that Julius had not experienced any of these unusual phenomena. By no means would he conceal his memory loss like Subaru had done. It was a great leap of imagination to come to such a suspicion. There is no relation between the influence of the books of the dead and his loss of memories. Making this conclusion was no issue at all in this situation. Thus, with that being the case, her suggestion had come as a lifesaver. Subaru. Certainly, what Shola said may have a grain of truth in it. Beatrice. Subaru, are you really going to do it, in fact? Up until this time you shared meals with that companion, I suppose. If he were to take advantage of Shola's words, for the time being, he could break through the first obstacle. Becoming the first one to read Meili's Book of the Dead, and making sure he is the last, and only one to read it, then what Subaru had done would remain hidden inside his mind. However, that is where Beatrice's genuine worry for him entered into the fold. She is concerned about Subaru's soul being damaged. Until now, the dead that Natsuki Subaru had seen here had only had a shallow relationship to him. There was a big difference between that and Meili. They had journeyed together, they had talked to each other, they had shared meals with each other. She was that kind of comrade in arms. Beatrice had been concerned about what sort of mental trauma would befall Subaru if he were to see her death with his own eyes. Subaru, I'll be fine, don't worry. As Shola said, I am most likely the best person to do it. To Beatrice's concerns, Subaru straightens his cheeks so that he looks serious and nods. Certainly, looking at the memories of a deceased person whose face you know could very likely cause someone to have mental trauma or abnormalities. If you happen to be a good person, then maybe it would be unbearable. But that's not the case with him. It isn't so. For Subaru now, the journey with Meili, the words he had exchanged with her, the meals he had shared together with her, by no means was she that kind of comrade in arms to him. For these few hours, he had behaved as if was acquainted with her. They had shared 2 or 3 meals together, and sometimes she had helped him reassure him a bit, but that was the extent of their relations. She was just an unfamiliar little girl to him. He would not receive any mental trauma by seeing her death. Emilia, I am still against this. If we really have to, then it shouldn't be Subaru, but me. Beatrice, if Emilia wants to look at it. Betty will oppose it, in fact, if someone has to look at it. It's frustrating, but Julius or Subaru are our best bets for it, I suppose. But if you had seen how Julius looked like this morning, you probably want to erase him from the list of candidates here. Emilia, Beatrice. Emilia, who looks quite dispirited, trails off into silence at hearing Beatrice's reasoning. At least, Beatrice seems to have chosen to respect Subaru's will. However, due to what had happened just before, Emilia knows that Subaru's condition is quite unstable. Therefore, Subaru nodded at Emilia, whose amethyst eyes showed deep concern that did not disappear. Subaru, I will look. Perhaps, what if it's only a misunderstanding, and if you read it in high spirits, then maybe nothing will happen. Emilia, if anything happens, I will tear the book from you at once. I'll pull your hair as well. Subaru, I would prefer much more if you call out to me and shake my shoulders instead. With Emilia's superhuman strength, if she were to pull his hair, the back of Subaru's head would become a permanent, desolate wasteland. And then, after retorting with such false words, Subaru faces towards the bookshelf. Unchanging, Meili's book was still there, emitting a strange presence. From the beginning, at the times he had happened to catch a glimpse of it, he had seen it as just an ordinary, plain book. But now, from this strange aura the book had, it felt as if he could instinctually recognize the name. At any rate, he couldn't rely on just his senses. Thus, Subaru picked up the book to search into what he can't rely on in himself. Subaru. Behind him, Emilia and Beatrice are holding their breaths. Shola puts her hands behind her head, watching over Subaru's decision with a carefree expression. Whilst taking a look at these three individuals, Subaru takes a deep breath, and he places his hand on the thick books, which looked rather like a dictionary front cover. Subaru lets go as if he was trying to persuade himself to do it. Subaru mutters this and opens the book, his senses black out. Ah! Ever since the woman had been aware of what was around her, there had been nothing. There had been no one around. There were no men, women, adults, children, elders, babies, no one at all. Alone in the dark, dark, black forest, the woman was all alone. Being able to stand up and walk, being able to speak, being able to cry out in order to live. The woman was not able to do any of these things. All of these things were far away, unknown to the woman, vanished beyond oblivion. If she doesn't know how to speak, she cannot know how to mourn. If she doesn't know how to walk, she cannot know how to resist. If she doesn't know how to live, then there is no reason for her to know about dying. Therefore, the woman had no choices. The meaning of both life and death were not brought to this woman. She had been snatched away by the fangs of a beast. The beast had a horn on its forehead, and this hideous beast of slaughter was continuously engaged in ferocious slaughter. The woman did not know why this beast hadn't crushed her throat with its fangs, and had instead dragged her by the nape of her clothing back to its lair. However, choices, which were not supposed to exist, were born, and the woman's fate was decided under the beast's. She did not know any words, so she didn't know how to mourn. She did not know how to walk, so she didn't know how to resist. However, as she knew the way of living, she didn't think she would die. Taking notice of what had happened, the woman had followed the murderous beasts and had become their queen and had dominated the entire area. Assailing their prey however she wanted, eating whenever she felt hungry, killing whenever she felt like it, sleeping whenever she wanted to sleep, living the way she wanted to, killing the way she wanted to, and she was raised amongst the motherhood of slaughter. In the past, she lost the memory for the reason for her existence. She had been reduced to something like nothing, something that had no need for anything like a symbol, that sort of stuff. At this rate, she believed that for better or worse, she would die alone, as one of these beasts. This welcome is far warmer than what I thought it would be. However, I do not mean to hurt you. It was a girl in black, covered with a blood-reeking devilishness. It was a girl in black. The woman who led the group of beasts with a mere action of her hand was deprived of everything she had by that girl in black. Blood and flesh overflowed, dying throes scorched the sky, and the smile of the girl in black began to be coated in their jets of blood. Without knowing how to do anything, the woman, once again, was in a position where she had nothing. Girl in black asterisk. Been told to take you back with me. That's why I shall have you accompany me. The girl in black forcefully took the woman who had nothing. She took away the place where she had lived for a long time, the beast she'd spent so long with, the place where she'd been herself. Even after all that, the woman still could not do anything. She did not know any words, so she didn't know to mourn. She did not know how to walk, so she didn't know how to resist. She lost the way of survival, so this time she may have no choice but to die. How to mourn, how to resist, how to live, you lost all of those. No way, no way. I couldn't care less for however many dull excuses you come up with. That made her regret of not knowing how to mourn. Mourn for my sake. Resist for my sake. Live for the sake of loving me. Three that made her regret of not knowing how to resist. If you're saying that you've lost everything, forgotten everything, parted with everything, then I'll just have to discipline you, won't I? That's a mother's duty after all. That made her regret of forgetting how to live and her inability to think about how to die. More hellish than hell, more nightmarish than nightmares, more evil than evil. As for that, Mother gave all sorts of discipline, not for the sake of the woman, but for the sake of herself. Mother did not lie. Mother was impartial. Mother used every possible means to be loved. Mother, however, just used distorted version of those means. She remembered words. How to mourn got peeled away. She remembered how to walk. How to resist was painted away. She remembered how to live. It was etched into her that there would be no more hope to be had of a way of dying. Girl in black asterisk, please stop being under the complete control of that person. Because, except for me, surely, no matter how many lives you get, they would end up being insufficient. Suddenly, when she had remembered the way of words, and the way of walking, and the way of living, she had met again the girl in black. The girl in black had often shown her face to the woman. Before she even noticed, she was acting in accompaniment of the girl in black much more than before. Before meeting Mother for the first time, she remembered when she was thrown into warm water. Covered with blood, mud, and dirt, the merciless girl in black had sloppily rinsed her of the irremovable dirt. Or perhaps that had been the last sense of freedom the woman had felt. Mother's intention made it clear that she wanted the woman to be aligned with the girl in black. The girl in black was abnormally strong. Her way of killing was amazing. She knew more about how to kill rather than how to live. Everything else except for that was estranged in her. Black, 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 black is here. Well, it's better to leave it to you. A single event would shape everything else that had happened, or that's how it felt like. She was undisciplined. She wasn't strict. Was quite a handful as a companion. She couldn't take her eyes off her companion. She was not faithful to Mother. Not just in how she killed, but also in how she lived. There was freedom therein. She had seen hell. She had seen nightmares. She had seen evil. For her whole life, the woman thought she would never forget the horror. While she was together with the girl in black, while she went along and helped this undisciplined girl, it felt like what was engraved in her would fade away. But the woman asterisk, Elsa, died. She died. She turned to ashes and died. The girl in black who never dies even when she is killed. No, towards the end that girl was Elsa. Died. She died. She turned to ashes and died. She had a spear stuck into her belly. She lost both of her arms from her shoulders, and she also saw her with a broken neck. Still Elsa did not die. She thought she would never die. Died. She died. She turned to ashes and died. She had also endured Mother's training. She had also endured the hell and the nightmares and the horror. But Elsa had died. She was going to go back being alone. She had lost her herd. She had lost Elsa. She was all alone. Died. She died. She turned to ashes and died. Killed. She was killed. She was turned to ashes and killed. Those who had turned Elsa to ashes had captured the woman and imprisoned her. Alone inside a dark room, the woman questions the void around her. Hate, hateful, hatred. The feeling of hatred, what does it feel like? Sad, sadness, sorrow. The feeling of sorrow, what does it feel like? She doesn't know how to mourn. She doesn't know how to resist. Even for herself, she doesn't know the value of life. It was like this from the beginning. Before Elsa had died, before she could recognize that the girl in black was Elsa, before meeting Mother, before beginning her training, before her herd of beasts had been destroyed by the girl in black, before she had begun to lead the herd of beasts, before her life was saved by the whim of a beast, ever since the time she had been torn away from those who were supposed to be her real mother and father, the woman had been a defective product. The woman was set adrift, living. When she had been a beast, she had imitated the way of living of a beast. After being trained by Mother, she had done exactly what she told her to do. And even after she started to spend time together with Elsa, she had imitated the way she spoke. She had imitated her, imitated. From the beginning, this woman was that kind of creature. a humanoid creature that imitates people. She had behaved as others desired. The woman was capable of imitating others. She was a mere sham of the people she imitated. She had the form of a person, but was nothing like a person. Kill the bastard. She wonders if that is what she is thinking. Pursue him. She wonders if she is thinking of that in that manner. She wants to imitate someone that knows Elsa's death. She wants to precisely know what to do in regards to Elsa's death. She wants to imitate. She wants to see what is the correct norm. What should she do? She had lost Elsa. Who should the woman imitate now? Time had passed, and still she didn't understand. Meanwhile, while keeping up her appearances on the outside, the woman is a woman who continues to exist for the desires of those in her surroundings. She wished for change. If the events change, if her situation changes, she may come to an answer. That, or mother may want her to die. That also may be okay. She had let herself be shaped up as requested, as they desired, as if she was adrift. Then, if mother desires it, she can also take her life, which she can't find any particular value in. She hated it. She hated ending it right there, ending here. She hated it. A feeling of impatience burned her heart. Her desiring soul demanded her own desires. At the very least, she wanted to know the answer. The answer to what she should do, now that Elsa had been murdered, would do. Oh, so you came here too, black, 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 at night. In the library inside the Tower of Sand, in the place where the books of the dead were, a voice came from behind her. Around there stood a familiar black-haired boy who she knew well. Her heart jumped in that instant. She noticed it herself, deep down, that she was afraid. If he were to ask why she was there, she couldn't answer questions like whose book she herself was looking for, that she secretly came here. The boy asterisk. I just kinda had a book I wanted to look for. I really should have asked the others for help, though. I couldn't stand the feelings of restlessness, and the boy is saying something. With a smile and a head tilt, she hides her exalted heartbeat, pretending as always. The boy asterisk. Don't stay up too late, black, 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 black. As she was told that, she left the library, slowly walking away, then quickening her pace, and in the end, running. He saw what she was doing. He knows what she was doing. He realized what she was doing. Biting her nails and furrowing her brow, the woman squatted and calmed her breathing. He didn't see, he didn't know, he didn't realize anything. But she abandoned everything and started again. The woman understood why it was that she came all the way to this place, and it was all the more reason to change everything she knew and start all over again, abandoning anything and everything. The urge controls her head. As her repressed emotions are left to grind on her molars, the woman turns around. Going back through the road she just ran through, her legs gradually relax, and she eventually starts walking slowly. Finally walking so gently so as to eliminate the sound of her footsteps, she returns to the library where the books of the dead are. With his back facing her way, the black-haired boy was sitting on the ground. With how many books are scattered around the ground, had he already found the book of the dead he was looking for? Already guessing that, she felt jealous. But before he notices her, she definitely has to the boy asterisk. You're so damn shallow. Letting herself be controlled by feelings of desperation, she felt like blaming her impulsive actions. As she stops her feet, all that is before her eyes is the black hair on the back of the boy's unturned head. She was supposed to be coming back without making a sound and holding her breath. It's true that she doesn't hold a candle to Elsa, but even then, she could at least erase the sound of her footsteps. Then how did he find out? All of her thoughts become jumbled. She just came here while eliminating the sound of her footsteps, and he still saw through her with his back to her. What kind of explanation can she give now? No, even then, she should have said something, taking her training into account. It would have been fine if she had just come here. No matter what, the woman was brought by the boy. She was also supposed to take that into consideration. With a timid smile and a head tilt, she hides her exalted heartbeat, pretending as Al the boy asterisk. Don't try to suck up to me, it's disgusting. Nobody would want you doing that to them. Cutting off her train of thought and shutting her up as she was pondering and going around in her thoughts. What did the black-haired boy mean? The boy asterisk, don't give me that composed face. Submissive little doll. Are you going to ignore that desire in the depths of your own heart? Desire in the depths of her heart. Why did hearing him point that out weigh on her so awfully heavily? The boy, devote yourself to listening to your desire. If you do so, you'll see yourself a little more. And when you see yourself a little more, you'll know what you want to do. To know what she wants to do, to see herself. What she wants to do, what she desires, that is the boy asterisk. Now that's a nice face. Looks rich. When she noticed, the black-haired boy had turned around and was standing right before the woman. Boy's hand grabbed onto one of the woman's hanging braids and stared at her with horrible eyes that held a perverted pleasure. She couldn't take her eyes off of those dark pupils in front of her. The boy asterisk. If you understand your desire and began to see who you really are, then you'll begin to act more like yourself. Your boring worries and anguish. I'll make sure to remember them. Selfishly deciding what another person wants, the boy declared so while putting the woman's hair tips to his lips. This filled her chest with a feeling of dread, however. A slight pain burned in her chest. The boy, Elle make sure to remember them. If she understood her own desires, if she properly came to see who she really was, could the woman become more like herself, like what black was supposed to be? The woman asterisk I wanted to talk about last night. I'm wondering, how seriously should I take what we talked about last night? The sun rose. She finished her breakfast, and before they moved to the next trial in the tower, she contacted the black-haired boy. She thought about it so much she couldn't sleep. She thought, but no matter what, she couldn't come to an answer. The boy greeted the woman in the morning almost like his attitude last night never happened or something. So she had to make a special chance. She called out to him. Unable to control her restless feelings, at the very least she needed to get him to a place where no one else could hear them, then it might be better. The boy asterisk, not here. Let's change places. That suggestion came from the boy. They changed places. As they entered the room, she wanted to question him about the meaning of his words from last night. Come to think of it, in the library last night, the boy had said something about going to talk with everybody else. The boy asterisk, sorry, black. As those words were whispered into her ear, her light body was pushed down into the floor, falling down. She hit her back on the floor yet couldn't scream. Just as her field of vision was flickering like that, she saw the face of the boy getting on top of her. The smirk on his face was the most disgustingly fiendish thing she had ever seen. The boy asterisk, asking that directly is against the rules. Her neck was gripped with a strong force. Her mouth was opening and closing, but the air that was so important for her body wasn't coming, writhing, struggling. She grabbed the hand on her neck and dug her nails in. Desperately, she kicked her legs. She can't move or push him off, but if she was Elsa, she could deal with him. The boy asterisk. This time it was a loss because of breaking the rules, but I hope you'll act even bolder next time. Do your best as you always have. She didn't understand what he meant. What was he talking about? What was he saying? What was he telling her? The boy asterisk, my oh my, this is going to be very interesting, the Natsuki Subaru murder mystery. I'm being killed. The reasoning was nothing but flawed. I'm going to be killed. In the end, could I do anything at all? Killed. When I was hunting in that forest, what did I killed? Meaninglessly unable to do anything. Being killed. It was fun. Killed. It was enjoyable. Be killed. Like I was part of some childish game. Being killed. 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 I'll kill you. Subaru In an instant, his head jumped back as if he was being flicked away. Black fell backwards, dropping what he was holding in his hands. He saw the world go around in circles. He took a pained breath. His lungs were having panicked spasms at his labored breathing. Emilia, hey, Subaru. As he was remembering the painful shock, the silver-haired girl rushed over to Black, who was screaming in pain. She was followed by a girl with light-colored hair. Both of them came and propped him up at the same time. Subaru, I am. WWWW what just? How WH? For Beatrice, deep breaths. Take deep breaths, in fact. You don't need to force yourself to talk, I suppose. Emilia, do not touch that book under any circumstances, in fact. His eyes were going in circles and foam was sprouting from the corners of Black's mouth as the girl correction, Beatrice desperately called out to him. Beatrice called out to the silver-haired G. Emilia who was reaching for the book. Yes, Emilia once again nodded and retracted her hand away after all. Emilia, but Beatrice, Subaru is looking weird. This book is. Beatrice, that's exactly the reason why. It would be troublesome if Emilia were to fall into the same condition, I suppose. It's probably quite likely that he ended up diving in too deep, in fact. He is confusing how he talks, I suppose. At Beatrice's analysis, Amelia's cheeks stiffen and she gulps. Following that, she swiftly comes to Black's side and holds on to his cheek, meeting his eyes with her own pupils. Emilia, Subaru, remember. You're okay. You are Natsuki Subaru, my knight. You're clueless about the world and broke beyond compare. You get along with everybody and Your Emilia starts picking through her memories, hysterically bringing up everything she can. While hearing her say all of that, Black begins to. Rue begins to. Rue begins to Subaru begins to recall himself. Subaru, Emilia, Beatrice. I am me, right. I'm not her I am, without Elsa. 5. Emilia. Doing fine, stay calm. Everything is fine, slowly. Slowly, okay. Beatrice. Like a splinter, slowly pull out those large memories, in fact. And then you'll be able to come back to the normal Subaru, I suppose. Subaru, HK, Emilia and Beatrice talk to Subaru, yes, Subaru. They talk to Subaru. While those words are reaching his ears, somehow he sorts through all he saw just now, sorting through them, doing it somehow, down to the very end, the memories. The moment his life was extinguished. Julius, Emilia Sama, sorry I made you wait. I heard about it from Madame Ram on the way Echidna. Is it true that you found that girl's named book? Then, Julius, who was running up the stairs, arrived. Julius, Echidna and Ram arrived and were caught up with the fact that Maylie was absent. To those three people, Emilia and Beatrice started explaining the current situation. Shola was silently staring. She was staring at a book, lying at her feet, to which she was indifferent. She narrowed her black eyes. There wasn't a single hint of emotion in that stare. She was simply silent, silently staring. 1. She calls her by the term chibiko, i.e. small child. 2. She uses Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, probably meaning Eichmann, or another way to say pretty boy metrosexual. 3. Though it may not be clear in the translation, Mother's speaking style is extremely similar to Capella in the Japanese, making frequent use of Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Atakashi, to refer to herself. 4. He starts off referring to himself similar to how Maylie would, using Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Watashi, and then switches over to Chinese letter, or, to refer to himself. 5. Here he doesn't use watashi, he uses or, i.e. saying that I am me or right. Arc 6, Chapter 47, I won't forgive you. Translated by Archbishop, you Archbishop, contributions by Yerek /u/Yerek Furuta /u/ Graced Harperd, Paper Lightning, proofread by Shifty /u/Shiftyfish 87 Furuta /u/ Graced Harperd, Tournament, Tournament 1122, fan art created by Art Source. Important preamble. Not to detract from the reading experience, but there are some important nuances in this chapter you have to be aware of, which are hard to do in English. Putting a preamble makes me avoid putting in tons of footnotes. As you have seen last chapter, reading Maylie's book caused Subaru to sort of take in her personality. She has a distinct style of speaking, using this form to refer to herself. Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, watashi, whereas Subaru tends to use Chinese letter, or. The way I have chosen to represent this is by using italics to represent when Maylie interjects in his thoughts. So any passages in italics should correspond to Maylie's voice inside Subaru's head. In addition, I preserve the self-referencing word, I myself, my etc., in the Japanese quotation marks. Also, WordPress doesn't let me, but the title of the chapter is said using Maylie's pronoun, so should be in italics. With that said, I hope you enjoy the chapter. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray, Zero, starting a life in a different world from zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English Japanese web novel source. A dark, 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 dark place. In the back of his head, the back. Myself, I who you Natsuki Subaru Maylie Portrout. Natsuki Kenishi, Elsa Granhirt, Natsuki Nayako, Petra Leite, Emilia, Shola, Beatrice, Frederica Baumann, Anastasia Harshin, Garfield Tinsel, Julius Juculius, Otto Sue and Ram the Blue Hair, who is I am you are I am myself is, the others are I you me myself I Natsuki Subaru. Myself I Natsuki Subaru. Who I Meili Portrout? Who I Meili Portrout? These thoughts spin round and round and round in his mind, blurring the lines between what is reality and what isn't. They are fused together as one, blending as one, becoming entwined as one, feeling affection as one, hating as one, suffering as one, loving as one, desiring as one, killing as one, wishing as one, destroying as one, threatening as one, understanding as one, crying as one, laughing as one, not understanding as one. You can only be yourself. Others can only be themselves. There's no room for compromise. No compromise out of pity. No chance to engender a compromise. No being considerate to each other. There's nothing, nothing at all in the end. Emilia, Subaru, Subaru. Shaking his head back and forth, he exerts himself in trying to extract the thorn of the so-called other person from inside himself with utmost effort. Emilia and Beatrice both gently hoist him up by his shoulders and prop the struggling boy up from his left and right. Whilst feeling traces of the two's worries on their cheeks, the boy, the individual that should be called Natsuki Subaru, is trying to determine the boundary between his own self and others. He is struggling, trying to regain himself. A swirl of thoughts clouds him. The correct answer disappears due to the whirl of emotions which were melting together inside him. His lungs were convulsing. If he were to feel his throat now, he would realize that his breathing had become painful. From within his neck, he was experiencing a severe difficulty in his breathing that had come to life just now. A fear that he would suffocate was slowly attacking him. The sensation of impending death once again revives within him. The feeling of wanting to vomit surfaces inside him and causes tears to stream out of his eyes. Subaru. Whilst confronted by this horrible feeling, Subaru slowly and carefully tries to exclude things which do not define him from within him, struggling to establish his own personal identity. First-person pronouns, second-person pronouns, memory, recollections, impressions, feelings. Identify which belong to the other person and distinguish between them. Just like that, if he sifts through what is not his and removes the stuff that got blended together, he will go back to as he was. Otherwise, this state where they are fused and blended together will never peel off. It was himself and the little girl who had been killed by his own hands that were mixed together into a hodgepodge of echidna. Natsuki-kun, what on earth did you see? Are you able to tell us? Subaru. Ah, ah. A voice had called out from in front of Subaru as he was immersed by his current identity crisis. He looks at her. Right in front of him, at the same level he was crouched at, a person with pale, turquoise eyes is squinting at him. Anastasia, no, now it's Echidna, right? In any case, it's that girl. Despite Subaru having such recognition, Echidna's eyes remain quite serious, and she continues to speak. Echidna, I sympathize that you are in a tough spot. But the current situation we are all in is quite grave. If you are able to, we need information as soon as possible. That way we don't make any mistakes when dealing with this. Emilia. Wait, Echidna. Just now, Subaru experienced something terrible. Echidna, of course, I know that. I also appreciate that his recklessness was something he did for us. You know, that is why we ought to have a duty in responding quickly to his judgment. Subaru can only let out a hoarse breath, as Echidna's assertions pierced through Emilia, who had tried to defend him. Whilst talking, Echidna's gaze for a moment turned towards the fallen book on the floor behind him. Taking a look at the thick black binding of the book, Echidna continued her speech with her. Because Echidna, the little girl who accompanied us, is missing. Furthermore, we found a book which seemed to match with the little girl's name in this library that records the memories of the dead. This situation is serious. We cannot afford to be treading water here. Emilia, but Emilia can't find a rebuttal against Echidna's low, insisting tone of voice. In fact, Echidna's complaint was justified. In this messed-up situation, the only one to possess such vital information is Subaru. Taking everyone's feelings into consideration, it can be said that everyone here has no time to spare to calm down. As she knows that, Echidna is prepared to be blamed, so with a steeled heart, she raised her questions at Subaru. At hearing her resolve, Subaru grits his teeth again and places his hand against his throat. With all his strength, fighting against the feeling that he can't breathe, he shut his eyes and Echidna. Let me try asking again, Natsuki-kun. What did you see inside the bow, Subaru? I saw Meili's memories, Echidna. Subaru responds with perfect honesty to Echidna's questions without attempting to deceive her. Just as he said that, next to her, Emilia held her breath, and in front of him, Echidna closed her eyes. Next to them, Beatrice, Julius, and Ram each, respectively, have expressions of worry and grief floating across their faces. The Book of the Dead had shown Subaru Mayli's memories. There isn't a single person here who wouldn't be able to understand what that meant. Could there have been a mistake, and the memories in Mayli's book had been laid out there by some error? How easy would it have been to comfort oneself by clinging onto such futile hope? However, in this place, he isn't alone in not wanting to surrender himself to this deception and escaping towards the more comfortable option, especially for the girls right next to Subaru, whose cheeks had stiffened in distress trying to bear this. Beatrice, calm down, Subaru, in fact. Calm down and focus on regaining yourself, I suppose. Subaru, so, why, Beatrice, it's okay, in fact. Right now, you can rely on Betty, I suppose. This isn't just your fault, Subaru, in fact. Don't beat yourself up, I suppose. Subaru. Beatrice had stood up and hugged Subaru's head as he breathed unsteadily. The little girl was gently stroking his black hair with her hands, whilst checking on Subaru's well-being, which was scattered into thousands of little pieces. He notes the irony in it. Beatrice had so benevolently said that it wasn't Subaru's fault. But this was no one's fault but Natsuki Subaru's, who had committed this crime. Not knowing this fact, Beatrice was speaking gently to him and treating him kindly. It was so absurd that it was almost comical, yet harrowing. Julius, Miss Ram, what do you think? As Beatrice and Subaru had been giving this exchange, Julius, with a serious look etched on his face, had turned towards Ram and tried to get her input on the matter. Compared to the others, the complexion of those two had not paled in shock to the same extent. Following Mayli's memories, it's known that these two had been the most wary about her. At least, Mayli had felt that both Ram and Julius had never lacked in vigilance towards her, as she had once been an assassin. Conversely, she had certainly taken note of Emilia and Echidna's carelessness towards her. Julius, if you believe the words that Subaru just spoke, Miss Mayli has already. Ram, there's no way Barusu would be skillful or cold-hearted enough to conjure up a lie in this situation. I'm certain that the book is Mayli's. To make sure, we could have someone else check it. Holding her slender arms, Ram glares down at the book that was still lying on the floor. Following that speech, Julius frowned in thought and said, Julius, if I were to, Ram, would there even be any leeway for you, since you'd be reading one of these books for a second time? So to speak, what if doing it a second time you end up in the same state as Barusu? Of course, we could also presume that it has only resounded to this degree in Barusu due to him being immature and inexperienced, Julius. Ram. But unfortunately, when it comes to your mindset now, whether it can be said to be more stable than Barusu's, Ram hasn't evaluated it as being any better. Standing up stiffly, Julius held his breath as he heard Ram's words, who had narrowed her light pink eyes. However, he quickly shook his head and said, That's reasonable, Julius. It's bitter, but I have no basis to reject the words of Miss Ram. Yesterday, when I acted in this predicament so selfishly and arbitrarily without consulting anyone, I'm definitely not qualified to do this at all. Echidna, I am sorry, but I also agree. Echidna raised her hand up and barged her way into the conversation after hearing Julius' self-deprecating words. And whilst fiddling with her white scarf which was wrapped around the base of her neck, she said, Echidna, however, the basis of my argument is not about the state of mind which Julius is in. Purely, I am only stating my opposition to this from looking at the state Natsuki-kun is in and saying that it's too dangerous to try this. Ram, it's pretty much a fact that it's dangerous. It's quite obvious that this situation is pretty messed up. Julius, indeed. Since the last time, it seems that the influence from reading the book has come out more strongly. The only question is whether this is down to reading the book more than once or whether it's due to the specific book you read. Ram, maybe it's both the number of times you read it and who the book belongs to. As Ram and Julius rack their brains, Echidna nods at the two saying, Echidna, simply put, could there be a mechanism where your burden increases the more books you read? Or perhaps, could it be that it warps your mind due to seeing the memories of a person that was close to you? I think the possibilities are divided into two. Ram, a person close to you, huh? Echidna had raised her fingers up, and to her conjecture, Ram turned towards Subaru. Whilst seeing her glaring at him, Subaru desperately tried not to scream from where he was, his face pressed against the middle of Beatrice's delicate chest. Most likely, Echidna's guesses were correct. The reason why Subaru's heart had suffered so much damage was due to her latter guess. The cause of this burden was likely because he had looked at the memories of someone he was quite well acquainted with. People involved in closer relationships, those fresh records of life, bring a greater impact. It's natural that people are more interested in closer companions than people they have more distant relationships with. Subaru also wished this as a fact. As a matter of fact, Subaru and Mayli's minds had almost merged together, and he was coming to grips with that he wanted to know her. As a result, Subaru had come to face the unfathomable emptiness in the depth of oneself. That young girl had been carrying this feeling of emptiness for all of her life. Emilia, anyways, we can't sit still without doing anything. Let's go and search for Mayli. A strong feeling of silence echoed across the room. It had been Emilia who had looked up firmly with both of her hands placed upon her chest and said this. Emilia had gained everyone's attentions in the library. Subaru widened his eyes at her words. Subaru, search. Search, searching, what the heck? What is the meaning of this? Mayli, she damn, but I am already dead. Even though they never even cared about her before she died. Emilia, even if we find her, it's probably too late. If only we had been together with that girl, but probably we couldn't have. But at the very least, we need to find her body. Subaru, Emilia, so no one at all knows where that little girl could have wandered off to. First of all, we shall find her, and after that, we will see what we can do. Let's go search for her. Emilia's words weren't concrete. They were far off from being reliable and wise. What was the point of this? The insistence of the me inside Subaru remained unchanging. Moreover, it should have argued that it was a useful way of using time if it was being a realist. However, no one in this place opposed Emilia's suggestion. There wasn't a single person who'd flatly deny her and say that was erring. Therefore, what followed Emilia's proposal was a realistic discussion on how to go about searching for Mayli. She announced that they would split into groups to search for her. Emilia, we have no choice but to change our plan for today. We need to split up and search for her. Ram, before we do that, Ram will go and check to see if Rem is safe. Before I went out to call for Emilia Sama, Barusu, and everyone else, I was with her in the spirit's room. I will go back now once again. Julius, that's okay, Miss Ram. Subaru, it seems like a cruel thing to ask, but I want to make sure. Did you also happen to see Miss Mayli's last moments in her Book of the Dead? Subaru hesitated to answer Julius' carefully worded inquiry. The answer to that question, on whether he had seen Mayli's last moments, is a yes. Subaru had experienced the very moment in which Mayli's life had been snuffed out. Her neck had been strangled. Her consciousness had slipped away as she was being choked. Her thoughts had been filled with hatred and despair. And then it had stopped abruptly. It must have been in that very moment that her life had ceased. It was Natsuki Subaru who had experienced this and had been complicit in hiding the girl's corpse. Natsuki Subaru is helping the man who killed me. The Natsuki Subaru who knows me was helping none other than Natsuki Subaru, the most detestable in this world. Echidna, Natsuki-kan, I want you to answer. Did you see her last moments? Where is she now? Did you see what on earth caused her death? Subaru. Echidna had kept hounding Subaru with questions too as he remained speechless. It felt like the emotions in her words indicated that she was feeling suspicious on her pretty countenance. Her words made him feel on edge. His heartbeat quickens, his back starts to sweat. He fears that Beatrice, by his side, could notice this. In fact, Subaru wonders if everyone knows that he had some involvement in Mayli's death. Subaru wonders if they already know and are feigning ignorance in order to draw out a confession from him by cornering him with devious tricks. These crazy ideas cross his mind. But each time these ideas had come to his mind, the look in their eyes denied these thoughts as being plausible. Emilia, Beatrice, Echidna, and Julius' eyes had turned towards Subaru. His hands stained with blood, his thoughts scuzzy. Subaru is only struggling to frantically protect himself. He possesses such an ugly, rotten heart. That's what it seems like. Then, better yet, listen to my desires, Subaru. I didn't see up until the point where she died. There's no doubt, though, that she's inside the tower, though. Subaru bit down firmly the temptations brought by her. Dangerous feelings are sprouting up deep down inside of him. She was trying to convince Subaru to confess to his crime. That was the sweet curse left behind by Meili Portrout. These thoughts are certainly newly born within Subaru. They want Emilia and the others to find Meili's dead body. Find her, mourn her, repent for what had happened, make him feel sorrow. The thoughts inside of him want to relieve the emotions coiled within his heart. He was getting to the point where he too no longer knew who out of Natsuki Subaru, myself, and Natsuki Subaru desired what. Echidna, do you have any strength left to read the book again? Beatrice, Echidna. Echidna had thrown out a suggestion at him which you could call completely ruthless as he struggled to decide on what he wanted. For a second, Subaru tried to reply with her, if you say I have to do it, but before he could, Beatrice had snapped at her. While still hugging Subaru's head, Beatrice's round eyes sharpened. Beatrice, what name does Betty have to shout out, in fact? In any case, I won't let that happen, I suppose. Past this, I oppose it, for both emotional and other reasons, in fact. Echidna, given the risks of being joined together as one, I would never have seriously recommended it. I wanted to make sure he was prepared just in case, that's all. You know, it wasn't my intention to make him do it even if he insisted. Beatrice. Let's pray that was what you were really thinking, I suppose. Beatrice speaks angrily over his shoulder to Echidna, who was hastily taking back her words. Immediately after this exchange, it was Emilia and Julius simultaneously who broke the awkward silence that the two had left behind. Emilia, stop this now. I also don't agree with making Subaru do more reckless things. I also don't want us to be forever discussing this here. We need to start moving quickly. Julius, I completely agree with Emilia-sama. In these circumstances, we can assume it's very likely that an accident befell Miss Meili. Something may have happened, like slipping off the balcony or off the stairs, or she could have gone outside the tower. Shola, that's not what happened. Out of nowhere, Shola, who hadn't participated in the conversation until then, had interjected to deny the concerns that Julius had blurted out. She had picked up Meili's Book of the Dead that had fell down underneath the woman's feet. Whilst picking it up by its spine, she was shaking it from left to right. Shola, because if Chibiko number 2 had gone outside the tower, I would definitely have turned into a killing machine. What I mean by that is that no one went out Y-side. Tilda Emilia, you sure are quick to touch the book that we hesitate to touch, for some reason. Shola, leaving it out on the floor makes me feel kinda anxious. Like, what if someone thinks that it's disrespectful towards the library? I don't actually want to be a presence kill 'em all, you know. Note, Shola says something in English here which makes absolutely no sense. Doesn't even seem to be a reference. While saying this, Shola was throwing the Book of the Dead around her hands as if she was juggling it. Her attitude seemed to be one born out of fear of disrespecting the library. However, it felt more unscrupulous in effect than anything. Julius scowled at her attitude. Julius, Miss Shola, I would like for you to start messing about with the book. You're Shola. You guys think that my heart isn't filled with grief or something like that. I'm not sure I said such a thing. For sure Chibiko number 2 clung to me quite often. I also didn't dislike number 2, but ultimately, except for Master, I don't give a fig about anyone elsey. Looking quite indifferent, Shola smiled and disregarded Julius' words. He couldn't catch a glimpse of any evil intent in what she had said. It was undoubtedly what Shola really felt, at least, that's how Subaru perceived it. In brief, she's a person who also finds it hard to comprehend certain emotions within her heart compared to ordinary people. Actually, no. Ever since he came to this place, Subaru has only had a limited amount of contact with them. It's no wonder he isn't able to comprehend their true feelings. He wonders what complex emotions could be hiding on the other side of the mask of her smiling face, though that was just something he came to realize all too well now, after assimilating my life. Emilia, let's split up. We'll look for Meili. Subaru, you stay here with Beatrice. In between Subaru's self-condemnation and the awkward atmosphere left behind by Shola, Emilia raised her voice and cuts in with a few words to urge them all into action. Subaru's heart panged with shame at hearing the girl's instructions. They want to find me Emilia. Beatrice, I'm leaving Subaru to you, okay? I'm going to go look around where Reed is. Beatrice, very well, in fact. Emilia and everybody else, be careful, I suppose. Exchanging these words and placing him under Beatrice's care, Emilia and Beatrice sought out everyone's roles, praying for some stroke of luck in this situation. Emilia took Ram, Echidna, and Julius with her and went back into the tower to search for Meili. As he sees them disappearing out of the library, Subaru can't find any words to see them off Beatrice. Well then, I guess you aren't thinking about going with them, in fact. After seeing off the search party, she had been left behind next to Subaru. Whilst glaring at Shola, Beatrice had bluntly said this. At receiving Beatrice's scathing glance, Shola replied in an exaggerated tone, "Boo what Shola, you gotta remember my role here is just a star's keeper new. So given that I've taken that title, my body and soul belong to Master. So if Master was to wish for it, I would follow his requests with all I have. Beatrice, if that's the case, then you must also go and search for Meili, I suppose. Don't just dawdle here. Shola, really, is that so?" Shola had craned her neck and looked towards Subaru with a look on her face that looked almost coquettish. Looking over Beatrice's head, she questioned Subaru about it directly. There's something bewitching about her appearance rather than the usual nonchalant appearance on her face. For the first time, her facial expression showed signs of something else other than the usual youthful demeanor she has. Subaru's heart once again leapt at seeing the charm in her face. It was as if he had been surprise attacked. He reflexively raised his face up and looked back into Shola's black irises, in which he couldn't read anything from. Face to face with Subaru, Shola's lips relax, and showing no traces of male intention, she holds the Book of the Dead in front of her ample breasts. Shola, if Master wished me to do so, I would even knock down the moon. That's why I want to hear it from Master, not from the half-witch, or from Chibiko #1, or from the pretty boy. Subaru, Shola, Master, what should I do? Do you want me to look for Chibiko #2? Or, Shola trailed off her words, choosing not to say anything past that point. However, while looking for Subaru's decision, and while she held the Book of the Dead by her breasts, Shola refrained herself from saying any more. Subaru reflected, but couldn't come up with anything to say to her unwavering attitude. Where was the right answer deep down in himself? Subaru. His conflicted emotions towards what Emilia and the others had suggested were proof of Natsuki Subaru's current contradictory existence. Meili Portrout, her life, which by no means could be said to have been long. By having read the contents within her Book of the Dead, it had snatched away at him as it liked, as if digesting parts of him, blasphemously chewed, swallowed, and digested with an invisible stomach. Natsuki Subaru had fully savored the life of me in twice the meaning of it. As a result, the mixed consciousnesses of Natsuki Subaru and Natsuki Subaru were divided into something which half resembled schizophrenia, having also now taken in the little girl. Subaru wants to conceal the manner in which Meili had died. Subaru wishes them to find Meili's dead body that he himself had hid. Subaru hates Natsuki Subaru who killed me. And thus, contradicting wishes were born inside of Subaru, spurring him in trying to make their desires come true. Subaru, Shola, go and search for Meili. Please go and help Emilia and everyone else. Before he could even notice it, Subaru was issuing out something like an order regarding what to do about Meili. Receiving his instructions, Shola raised her eyebrows and straightened her body into a salute. Shola, roger that. If that's what Master wishes, I will do whatever you desire. Winking at him, whilst giving him a loving salute, Shola held out the book towards Subaru. He received from her the book which felt like a black weight in that moment. Shola stuck out her tongue at Subaru, whose face had scrunched up into a frown. She looked somewhat mischievous, just like she was getting her own back. She turned away from Subaru, and she jumped down the library stairs with one giant leap. He sees her swaying black hair gradually disappearing from his sights. Feeling as if he had been released from a great tension, Subaru let out a sigh of relief. Subaru, such strange things. The falsely accused Natsuki Subaru, who doesn't want to divulge his participation in the crime or let them find her dead body. I, the victim, wish for them to find my body and clear the anger and regret from myself. Natsuki Subaru, the perpetrator, who murders people and piles up acts of wickedness one after the other. All of these thoughts exist alongside each other in one body. All of them loom over and try to press Natsuki Subaru into selecting one of their choices. If he truly only cared about his own skin, he would have shut his mouth regarding Meili's life and death. He would have worked his brain harder to falsify the contents that he had seen within the Book of the Dead. In fact, he couldn't really have done that. Subaru wouldn't really have the intelligence to do such an act. But more than that, he felt hostility towards Natsuki Subaru and emphasized towards my own regrets. There was anger towards himself in letting such a wicked being do as it pleases. It's true that last time, and the time before that, and even before that, that someone had been behind Subaru dying. But even that seems like as if it's a plot set up by Natsuki Subaru lurking inside of Subaru. It seems likely that it's a trap set up to make Subaru act rashly and hate the others. After all, what he had thought before reading the Book of the Dead was right, wasn't it? Emilia, Meili, and everyone else, not one of them was truly evil. The only one who is evil is Natsuki Subaru, isn't it? Beatrice, Subaru, it's not good for you to be languishing in thought, in fact. It'd be better if you let go of that book, I suppose. Subaru. Just noticing her, Beatrice was kneeling right beside him, looking at him with a look of concern in her eyes. Right in front of him, she was giving him a look of concern. It resurfaced in his mind that Emilia had looked at him in the exact same way. A sense of discomfort takes hold of Subaru's heart. The emotions that Beatrice was letting off, they weren't directed towards Natsuki Subaru himself. Rather, they were directed at Natsuki Subaru. It seems like such a terribly dishonest thing to do in having received this himself, after having hidden the fact that he'd lost his memory, and on top of that, having kept his silence about the true nature of Natsuki Subaru. Shouldn't he tell them? Before he knew it, it had been the current Natsuki Subaru who had snatched Meili's life from her. If that's what was going to happen, then, before that danger is once again turned towards Emilia, Beatrice, and the others, Subaru. Why are you so kind to me? Beatrice. Wait, that's such a sudden question, in fact. What's the matter, I suppose? Subaru. No, never mind. As a final word on this matter, if he is to crack the meaning behind these relationships that he had borrowed, maybe he needs to hear what had happened before becoming like so their real opinion. He needs to know the real meaning of why Emilia, Beatrice, and everyone else have such so much faith and are always turning towards Natsuki Subaru. Subaru. The moment he had tried to put some deep thought into it, a feeling of hesitation arises inside of Subaru's heart, that which I had turned towards Elsa. Emilia and the others, who in this world treat Natsuki Subaru as someone close to them, that which they turn towards Natsuki Subaru. A gemstone that only Natsuki Subaru could have, that only he could gaze upon. The traces, the lingering scent, the remnants, the warmth that should have been there. Why was it that only Natsuki Subaru was exposed to it in such proximity? Subaru. Why such a man? Why such a cruel human being? Why a man with such a cruel smile? Why this man involved in the death of Elsa? Why this man who laughed as he murdered Meili? Why this man who tried to conceal my death? Why is such a man, this man, so loved? Subaru. I want to know. I don't know. I want to know. I don't know. Only me, only Subaru. Only I do not know the reason. I don't know. I don't understand. It's all so one-sided. Subaru, if I ask, will I understand? If I ask, will I be able to call it into question? Can you tell me? Did you think it was genuine? The smile I expressed. The smile I showed was a fake. There was emptiness in my heart. That's because everyone wears masks, even you, Natsuki Subaru. Even despite you not having wanted to show it to your mother and father outside the house. If there's a way to know the truth, then where is it? What do they all really think of me? What are their true feelings? Why do they all believe in Natsuki Subaru? I can give that to you a way to know about this. Subaru, a voice resonating in his mind, cruelly seduces him, and he realizes that the solution to the problem that had dominated his thoughts for so long was close by. Hadn't there been up until now a way to know the answer to this resting in between his arms? Beatrice, Subaru. Staring at the silent Subaru, Beatrice narrowed her eyes with uneasiness. Without returning her gaze, Subaru simply looked down between his arms. Subaru, a black, heavy tome, it seemed like it was offering a gruesome welcome to his curiosity. Arc 6, Chapter 48, Murder Becomes a Habit. Translated by Archbishop, Archbishop Yerek, /u/ Yerek Furuta, /u/ Grace Harperd Archbishop, Archbishop proofread by Shifty, /u/ Shifterfish 87 Frosty, /u/ The Frustrate Manana fan art created by Art Source. Small preamble. Refer to the previous chapter for the format. I present Subaru thinking as Meili. In addition, you will see that something happens in the chapter that makes it more natural, easier to represent Meili's interjections this time around. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Rei, Zero Starting a Life in a Different World from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Subaru. Subaru was silent whilst he looked down at the black cover of the Book of the Dead which he held in between his arms. Beatrice nestles closer to him, and feeling her worried and strange gaze, Subaru doesn't dare to move. Until now, what had dominated Natsuki Subaru's mind were questions he'd ask himself without any particular answer, as if engaging in Zen dialogue. The truth is, what had occupied Subaru's mind were just shallow thoughts that could be discarded as just wasteful thinking. They were the laughable, vague questions of a child. Everyone, no matter who, always has an inner face which others would never see. This was an obvious truth which everyone learned as they come of age. The expression of hatred behind a smile, the sorrow and tears behind their anger. It is human beings that can pretend that these emotions don't exist while hiding their true feelings. It is impossible to fully understand the true wishes, the true desires, the true intentions of those human beings. Brothers, sisters, parents, children, spouses, family members. You can never fully come to understand any of them. Friends, childhood friends, best friends, lovers. No matter how close your relationship becomes, by no means is it ever possible to uncover what is hidden deep inside them. What they love, what they desire, what they prefer, who they let their guard down around, who they feel comfortable with. These were completely different problems to those various connections of mind and body. Indeed, he knows that. But still, he doesn't want to abandon these thoughts just for the sake of it. He wants to know, he wants to understand it, he wants to hear it, he wants them to reveal everything. That is his arrogant but desired wish. Even more so when it involves both his own and the other's lives hanging by a thread. Even if there is absolutely no way to do it, nor would one come to be. No, there was supposed to be absolutely no way to do it. He laughed at the thought of it, sure there was supposed to be absolutely no way to do such a thing. But in this Taygeta library, Subaru ended up finding out how. Meili Portout. By reading her Book of the Dead, Subaru vicariously experienced Meili's life, understood what she thought and felt, and who she hated at the time of her demise. Of course, this extremely short experience did not define Meili entirely. The time she had spent alive was too long to even accept all her individual events into his brain. Even if it had been a short life that she had lived, he could by no means have absorbed into him all of her memories, eagerly gnawing away at the key points, drinking them in with the intention of understanding Meili. Those were how Natsuki Subaru felt right now. Such was painfully clear to see. However, but even so, by comprehending that he didn't understand even a bit of the girl, Subaru now had a deeper understanding of Meili than ever before. There was a person whom I cherished. Her life was stolen away from me, and now alone, my heart continued to wander. Being with Subaru and the others, who were the ones responsible for that, I struggled to understand what exactly my purpose was. I went to the library to find her Book of the Dead, and I felt ashamed and in despair when I was discovered. Meili, whom Subaru knew absolutely nothing about. He had discovered the girl's innermost feelings and desires without even expecting it, and thus he had realized. This Book of the Dead itself was the means to truly find out the true intentions of others, without any falsehoods between Subaru. It was just that he wants to know, that's the only thing he desires. The real intentions of Emilia, Beatrice, and the others in the tower is what he wishes to know. He wants to know why they put so much trust in Natsuki Subaru. Why do they believe Natsuki Subaru who was responsible for killing me? Now, what do they think of Subaru who desperately pretends to be the despicable Natsuki Subaru? Intimacy is just camouflage, hatred is the reality, and feelings like anger, sadness, and joy are temporary. Hostility and malice, aren't those their true feelings? I don't know. I want to know. I want to trust them. I can't trust them. Are Emilia and the others allies, or are they enemies? Are they enemies who killed Subaru, or are they allies that want him to live? Can he love them, or can't he? Can he hate them, or can't he? Won't he obtain that answer by reading their Book of the Dead? Beatrice. Subaru, you really look terrible, in fact. If you're feeling uneasy here, it'd be better if we went somewhere else for you to rest, I suppose. Touching Subaru's shoulder, who was immersed in thought, Beatrice gives her suggestion. Subaru was rendered breathless for a minute, being trapped by the gaze of her characteristic blue butterfly pattern in her eyes. Looking at it, the girl's tiny palm rested on Subaru's shoulder. What would happen if he took her hand, grabbed her head, and smashed it on the floor with all his strength? Subaru, how small, Beatrice. What are you suddenly starting to say, in fact? This smallness is exactly the reason behind Betty's loveliness, I suppose. Subaru has also said that, in fact. Subaru reflexively relaxes his cheeks as Beatrice sullenly blurts this out. Certainly, if Subaru was in his normal state, it wouldn't be weird for him to have said that. Noticing the similarity between himself and Natsuki Subaru, he smiles bitterly. Small. Truly, Beatrice was just a small child. Her neck was thin and her bones fragile. The hand that rested on Subaru's shoulder was small enough to be fully covered by his palm. If he put even a bit of strength into his arms whilst hugging her, it seems like her fragile body would break. If these thoughts are turned to actions, he should be able to easily kill her. If he kills her, if her life blinks out of existence, will her book appear in the library? Just like you did with me and Tildero. Subaru. Suddenly, Subaru hears a voice from his subconscious, one which would be impossible to call his own. It is somewhat sweet, glossy enough to sound adult, but it was a strangely familiar voice. In that short period of time, the voice became familiar enough that he could call it his own. Voice inside him was that of the dead little girl who marks Natsuki Subaru's intentions. Subaru discards this event, concentrating on the matter in front of him. That is, whether the Book of the Dead could be realistically utilized. If so, then how would he go about making this come true, Beatrice? Your face looks really pale, I suppose. Indeed, we should go somewhere else, in fact. But before that, Subaru, our Beatrice. I must return that where it originally was, I suppose. It's no good for Betty, too, to be in the haze, in fact. Saying that, Beatrice takes the Book of the Dead from Subaru's stiff hands. She holds it cautiously to ensure the book doesn't open and places it where there was an empty gap in the bookshelf, the place where it originally was. Beatrice, it's easy to understand and remember where I positioned it, I suppose. However, it's possible that the books in this library will just start moving on its own, Subaru. A safety measure, huh? Yeah, I suppose that's right. Beatrice, you ought to think that bringing it out is pretty dangerous, in fact. This is safer than throwing them out onto the floor because Shawla is worried about that, I suppose. Subaru, I feel like being in this library is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Subaru dryly spits these words out as he replies to Beatrice. In reality, even in the world which Subaru knows, it's said that opportunities like coming across a book which has been published a number of years ago only come once. Just like coming across a second-hand bookstore whilst traveling, if he misses out on this opportunity, he may never find the book ever again. This speculation may also apply to this library. Like usual, had he been overthinking this? No doubt that this thought is bothering him. Either way, whilst warily looking at Beatrice's back as she struggles to arrange the books, Subaru immerses himself deeper and deeper into his sea of thoughts. Awfully realistically, counting backwards the lives from the warmth he'd felt, he searched for a way to kill her. Although Beatrice isn't the only one he should think about. Every single one of the members who are inside the tower are in a position to becoming a target to Subaru's plan involving the Books of the Dead. Melee, so you want to try and kill them because you want to check if they can be trusted or if they should be doubted. Oni-san truly is wa tilde arped. The voice of the little girl interrupted him, causing Subaru to inwardly click his tongue. The first thing he wants to say back to her is that he thinks that this is a necessary thought experiment. By no means is Subaru a psychopath that is dominated by homicidal impulses. He isn't controlled by such abnormal urges whereby he must take pleasure in deeds like that. But right now, when he was thinking this through, this had been the only choice that had come to his mind. It seemed rational. Melee, enough with the excuses. I woe tilde ender, can't you just tell me what you're going to do? It would be very easy to get rid of Beatrice. This is because Subaru can see her back. Unprotected, defenseless, completely unguarded. It can be clearly stated that Beatrice's life is precariously balanced by a thread which depends entirely on Subaru's flawed reasoning. When that rationality surpasses reason, Subaru will very likely take the girl's life quite easily. When it comes to Beatrice, the only options he has are to do or to not do. It seemed possible to entirely disregard the countless other possibilities that branched off as an alternative from his standpoint. Meili, WLL, what a tilde about the half-witch one san. The likes of Emilia would be even easier, a piece of cake. Once, he had even seized her by the neck after he had woken up. In the past, she hadn't shown any signs of resistance. As long as Subaru put all of his strength into his arms, he could easily break that fragile neck of hers. Certainly, he can say that she has strength similar to that of a pro wrestler, but it means nothing unless she is prepared to use it. If in an instant he strangles her neck with all his strength, Meili, he, it's your speciality, E tilde H. Ram, despite her sharp tongue, is in essence also merely a weak girl. It reminded Subaru about the time she cried while pressing her head against him, entreating him for his memories. With her thin arms desperately embracing him, weak, she was just a girl after all. Echidna is also the same way. Come to think of it, they're all weak girls. He really made the wrong selection of people if the mission was to cross the desert. As much as he would have liked to have more suitable people with him, there really just weren't enough people to go around. Therefore, even though Subaru could take advantage of that chance, the last obstacle in his way is a different story. Subaru, Julius. The only man who is the same as Subaru, until even now this character which carries a sword in hand is an obstacle that stood in his way. It'd be impossible for him to say that it would be a good idea to strike at him head-on. You could also say it's a suicidal act to strike at Emilia head-on, but that's a whole other story. In any case, if he was to implement the Book of the Dead plan, he will be the biggest wall in his way. In other words, Julius is the one he should beat first. Meili, with the amount of time it takes to search for the books, however much time you have, it's not going to be enough artilderite. According to the words of the girl, Subaru's purpose isn't simply kill and be done with it. Rather, killing is a necessity, a passing point that must be cleared as his desires lay in front, on the side of the books of the dead obtained in exchange for death. For that purpose, it is necessary to be certain. He had killed, he had failed, so he could not let it end like this. Beyond this, he has a goal. Beatrice, Subaru, that's enough books for the moment, in fact. Let's get far away from here. Like the spirit's room or somewhere like that, I suppose. You should calm down there, in fact. Subaru, spirits, room, Beatrice, coming back, taking Subaru's hand helps him to stand up. Subaru is reminded of the room with the spirit, and his restart point came to mind. That place is the green room, and at that place, Subaru, Patrash, Beatrice. You're saying that Earth Dragon's name again, geez. There's no point worrying about a partner like you, I suppose. I was the worried one. I can't believe this, in fact. Subaru, so sorry. I didn't mean it like that. For a moment, the figure of the Black Earth Dragon brushed his mind, and his lips softened. As Beatrice watched, Subaru hurriedly came back to his senses. However, even in this scene, Patrash remains the only one who Subaru can put his trust in. Actually, only Patrash who ran the risk of death to defend Subaru, regardless of its true intentions or feelings, a being who remained by the side of Natsuki Subaru, Meili, really. If she knew that Oni-san isn't Natsuki Subaru, I still woe tilde ender if she would do the same thing. Subaru, Meili. After all, on Oni-san's side, there isn't anyone, is there? Resonating in his mind is a smiling voice, mocking Subaru. Haunting him, an existence that differs from Natsuki Subaru tries to break his optimism. It was a silly point, and he would have been better off laughing it away. However, at this moment, Subaru couldn't afford that. His heart came to half agree with the girl's words. If they were to discover that even the kindness that made Patrash throw her everything at him, that which was directed at Natsuki Subaru, and that the current Subaru was a fake, he reckoned she would come to disregard him. Beatrice, hey Subaru, give me your hand, I suppose. Subaru, sure, his brain being toyed around by the girl's voice, Subaru grits his teeth with emotions that were hard to accept. Consequently, his vision started to shift out of focus. Holding out her hand in an attempt to hold his, suddenly she made a face indicating that she had noticed something. Her gaze staring at Subaru's wrist, she noticed it. Beatrice, There are scratches, in fact, and so many. Rolling up the sleeve of Subaru's right arm, Beatrice furrowed her eyebrows at the scratches, pathetic and painful to look at. Even if it seemed she did not notice the scratches deeply bored further up in his arm, just the forearm is enough. Subaru. At the moment, Beatrice does not know how Maylie had died. She therefore shouldn't be able to immediately connect these scratches with Maylie's death. But even discounting this, she should be wondering where on earth he got these scratches. If Maylie's corpse is found, she will inevitably be suspicious. Subaru. His unprepared heart began beating like an alarm bell going off. Before his eyes, laying her eyes upon his hand, Beatrice did not notice that expression of his. With instant action, it would be possible to take care of Beatrice. Maylie, what are you gonna do? Shouldn't you get started already? As if playing with his self-confidence, the voice urges Subaru to a decision. His temple throbbed from the blood circulating through it, along with his pounding heart. As things were, depending on what Beatrice continued with, he'd have to. Beatrice, it seems you scratched your arm again. A bad habit, I suppose. Subaru. Ah, Beatrice, this isn't good, in fact. If Emilia had noticed it, you would have made her really worried, I suppose. Even Betty can't overlook this when it's this bad, in fact. Tracing Subaru's scars with her fingers, Beatrice painfully cast her eyes down. Following those remarks, Subaru was unable to move from the unexpected impact of her words. It was almost as if Beatrice was familiar with the scratches that covered Subaru's arm. Even so, supposing the others noticed the scratches on Subaru, it is still completely different from the horrible situation, for entirely different reasons. There's no mistaking that this time the arm is scratched in self-mutilation. She had even said that she had concealed this from Emilia, which in itself was shocking. Beatrice, if you go to the room with the spirit, these wounds will be healed as well, I suppose. But still, because Betty cannot bear looking at it, Betty will heal it even if a little bit. As she says so, Beatrice wraps Subaru's wrist with a pale light. The cozy sensation that came about, warm as it was perhaps the twinge of his wounds healing up. Healing magic is what is being shown before his eyes. Subaru, at the same moment, any hostility that Subaru had for Beatrice inside was rapidly swept away. Along with this warmth, the humanity of Natsuki Subaru, which had ruptured along with the wounds on his wrist, certainly seemed to be restored as well. Maylie, boring. The little girl grumbled in Subaru's head, as if her hopes had been betrayed. Whilst listening to her directly in his skull, Subaru swallowed down the evil environment that had taken root in his head. Certainly it had been an option, but it had been nothing more than an option. There is no need for him to lead himself in the direction that longs for their Book of the Dead, especially in a situation where he hadn't any preparation. Subaru, inflicting harm on Beatrice right now is not a good idea. His preparations are not ready yet. Even if he takes the worst possible means, it must be done after thorough plans are made. As such now, this place Beatrice. Come now, let's go, I suppose. Subaru. Betty will eventually talk about it to everyone afterwards, in fact. Subaru, all right. Sorry to bother you, Beatrice. Beatrice, promise not to speak about this, I suppose. Although he did not know whether the concern of the girl before his eyes is genuine or not, Natsuki Subaru thought that he ought to listen to her. Firstly, though this is unrelated, there exists a phrase. Murder becomes a habit. That is one of the phrases the famous detective, Hercule Poirot, left the world with. Murder becomes a habit. The meaning of this phrase doesn't refer to a person who has killed a human being and then suddenly wakes up with a preference for murdering people, who then repeats the crime to satisfy their cravings. Murder becomes a habit. It refers to someone who solved their problem once by murder. For them, whenever another problem arises, they will think about trying to break through the problem through murder again. Murder becomes a habit. By the time they start to consider that murder is not one of those options, the utmost important thing would have had already changed. Murder becomes a habit. The truth is, even if there was a single murderer who didn't commit a crime by his own will, even if he dislikes the act, even if you see a glimpse of the memory of the one who had been harmed by such an action, that habit does not go. Murder becomes a habit. That habit, it does not go. Murder becomes a habit. A rough example of what a Zen dialogue is can be found here.